Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alan Helmick. Alan Helmick, born in 1946 and raised in Colorado, developed a passion for sports, especially baseball, from an early age. After completing his education, he married his teacher, Sharon. Together, they raised a family, welcoming 3 daughters and a son. Alan became a successful businessman, starting a real estate company and then expanding into retail and the automotive industry, which helped his family thrive. Sharon was a devoted homemaker, taking care of the family. Their seemingly perfect marriage lasted for 30 happy years until tragedy struck in January 2003, when Sharon suddenly died of a heart attack. This loss was the deepest shock of Alan's life. He struggled with grief and depression for a long time. Even 2 years later, in 2005, the pain of her death still affected him. To cope, Alan focused on supporting his children and began taking ballroom dance classes, pursuing the dream that Sharon had wanted to share with him just before her death. During the classes in Grand Junction, Alan met Miriam Giles, a 48-year-old dance teacher who had recently moved to Colorado. Miriam had also suffered a great loss. Her daughter had died of an overdose in 2000, which was ruled an accident. Unable to bear the pain, Miriam's husband took his own life while she slept next to him. Hearing her story deeply affected Alan, as he could empathize with her pain, and their relationship blossomed into a romance. After a few weeks of getting to know each other, Miriam moved into Alan's home. They lived together for a few years before getting married in 2006 and started looking for a new place to live. Miriam, a horse enthusiast, convinced Alan to buy a large plot of land with a stable. They eventually found a location that was ideal for Alan, as it allowed him to run his business from an office closer than before. He showed his love for Miriam by showering her with gifts. From the outside, Alan and his wife appeared to be a happily married couple. However, Alan's daughter was concerned about the pace at which their relationship was progressing. Despite this worry, both Alan and Miriam seemed genuinely happy. On the day of the dance competition, Miriam felt unwell. While Alan was busy processing documents and signing papers, she frequently went to the bathroom. Eventually, she walked out to the parking lot where Alan was waiting in his car. Miriam wanted to get some things from the trunk. After opening the trunk and searching for a while, she felt unwell again and hurriedly went back inside. Meanwhile, Alan continued to wait in the car. Suddenly, he noticed smoke coming from the back of the car. At first, he thought it was just exhaust smoke and turned off the engine. However, the smoke became thicker and blacker. Realizing something was wrong, Alan got out of the car and saw a fire in the trunk. He quickly ran inside to get a fire extinguisher. On the way, he met Miriam, who was using a container to get water from the bathroom to put out the fire. The fire department was called and quickly arrived to extinguish the flames. When Alan checked the trunk, he found a burnt rope soaked in gasoline. This raised suspicions, indicating that the fire was intentionally set and not due to a car malfunction. The fire department interviewed witnesses and assessed the scene, concluding that only Miriam could have caused the fire. However, Alan firmly believes that this is impossible, but he could not ignore the possibility that an intruder had quietly approached the car. He refused to believe that his beloved wife would try to harm him, let alone kill him. He dismissed the incident as an accident, although he expressed some doubts. The event was quickly forgotten, and although there was still uncertainty after the fire, the couple's life returned to normal. Unfortunately, during this time, Alan fell ill. He spent most of May in bed, but by June, he was starting to feel a little better. Although he was diagnosed with hypertension, he began to adopt a more active lifestyle. Alan loved life and looked forward to the opportunity to return to the field when he regained his health. After a long illness, he seemed to be recovering. However, he did not answer missed calls. This continued until June 2008, when Alan's daughter attempted to contact her stepmother, Miriam. She was also unable to reach him, so she left a voicemail mentioning her plans to visit her father. Unfortunately, her efforts went ignored. On the evening of June 6, she continued to try to contact her father, noting that she had not been able to reach him for over a week. She called her stepmother back, but there was no answer. In the voicemail, she asked her stepmother to inform her father that she wanted to see him and was concerned about his well-being. Despite living nearby, all of her attempts to contact him went unanswered, making it unclear why she did not go to the farm to check on him in person. At approximately 8 a.m. on June 10, 2008, Miriam left the house to go to the local Walmart. After shopping, she contacted her horse trainer. At approximately 9 a.m., Miriam called her husband, Alan, and left a voicemail saying that she loved him and planned to pick up groceries before meeting him at a nearby Chinese restaurant at 10 a.m. Alan did not respond to her message. Miriam tried to call him back but could not reach him and asked him to call her. By 11 a.m., Miriam was at the Chinese restaurant waiting for Alan. After about 15 minutes, she called him a third time, feeling increasingly anxious and upset that he did not answer. She decided to go home with her groceries. As she entered the laundry room from the garage by her usual route, she was surprised to see an overturned trash can. When she looked around the corner, she saw Alan's legs sticking out. Miriam saw her husband lying motionless on the floor, which frightened her. She dropped her belongings, began to cry, and immediately called the police. She told them that she had returned home from shopping and found her husband dead in the living room. Although she was initially certain that Alan was dead, she followed the operator's instructions to perform CPR. However, she felt it was in vain because he was unresponsive. A patrol car arrived at the Miriam family home. The police found Alan lying on the floor. The officer noted that Alan was cold to the touch and had no pulse. There was blood nearby, and the officer observed several open cabinet drawers and a trash can that had been knocked over. A .25 caliber shell casing was also found. When his wife Miriam was taken away from the scene for questioning and photographs, the police found it odd that she was completely clean, despite her claim that she had attempted CPR on her husband as requested. When questioned, Miriam admitted that she had washed her hands after administering first aid. However, the kitchen sink was found to be completely clean and dry, leading the police to believe that she had lied. They suspected that she had not actually tried to help her husband and had only pretended to do so during the phone call. In addition, her calm and even cold demeanor only added to the police's suspicions. Miriam, who has now been taken to the police station for further questioning, recounted the events of that tragic day from the beginning. She confirmed that she had woken up early, made coffee, and talked to her husband on the terrace. They discussed their plans for the day. After the conversation, she took a shower and made the final adjustments to her shopping list before going out to buy household items. It was a normal day, and she had called her horse trainer and, following his advice, bought carrots for the animals. When she first tried to call her husband, he did not answer, which was unusual for him. After the third call, she became alarmed and slightly angry. When she returned home, she found her husband lying on the floor. Confused as to what had happened, she immediately called the police. Miriam mentioned that Alan's son, Alan Jr., was at their house and had left for work around 6 a.m. The conversation then turned to Alan Jr., who had been living in their house for several weeks. He would come home after his shift. Alan Jr. had a separate room and used a different entrance to his room. He occupied part of the first floor and tended to live in isolation. At the time of the incident, Miriam had not seen Alan Jr. for about 4 days. She suspected that he was not getting along with Alan, but she did not provide any strong evidence to support this belief. Just before the incident, his son, Alan Jr., had come to visit him from Alaska. They had some paperwork to take care of. Miriam mentioned that they were experiencing problems. However, at the last minute, things took an unexpected turn. Alan had banned his son from coming and warned Miriam to call the police if Alan Jr. showed up at their house. Miriam said that Alan Jr. was in a dispute over the ownership of the stove and that his father had spoken out against him. This situation contributed to the deterioration of the relationship between father and son, and they did not see each other. She acknowledged the possibility that Alan Jr. might have threatened her father, but she was unsure of the specifics. It seemed that Miriam was trying to blame Alan Jr. The police discovered a particularly strange detail in Miriam's story. She could not even remember the addresses or ages of her husband's children, which was very unusual. Alan Jr.'s alibi was later verified, clearing him of suspicion. Other family members claimed there had been no conflict between Alan and his son, making it clear that Miriam's story was a lie. The police began to follow her movements around the city on the day of the incident. They found it strange that she made some unusual trips, especially when she went across town just to buy a bag of carrots, which was clearly not enough for their horses. They pointed out that the vegetables could easily have been purchased at Walmart. This behavior led the police to suspect that she might be trying to create an alibi to explain her long absence from home. Miriam became the prime suspect. In response to the detectives' questions, she said that they had a prenuptial agreement stating that all property acquired before the marriage would go to his children. She hinted that Alan might have been the victim of a robbery. Miriam observed that some shelves had been pulled out and found her husband's wallet left in the kitchen. Normally, the wallet contained several $100s in cash and several credit cards, but it was now missing. Their house was filled with valuables, but they never locked their doors. Miriam claimed that they never used locks or keys. Miriam stated that her husband had no enemies and that their neighbors were decent people. However, she also claimed that she was not involved in her husband's romantic affairs, so she could not provide details about any potential rivals Alan might have encountered. During questioning, Miriam revealed that Alan owned a gun collection. She also mentioned that Alan had struggled with health issues. She noted that he had quit smoking about a year before the incident due to high blood pressure and that his health had declined since then. Furthermore, he had been taking antidepressants to cope with emotional difficulties stemming from the death of his first wife. Miriam insisted that Alan had no enemies. However, she mentioned a minor dispute that occurred a few weeks before the incident with a contractor who was working on their property. Alan had asked for a handwritten invoice and then delayed payment for several weeks, but the debt was eventually settled. The police inquired whether there was any insurance policy on her husband. Miriam was unsure, but mentioned that Alan owed investors about $400,000 for various projects. This raised suspicions, as she had previously stated that she was unaware of her husband's financial problems. Unexpectedly, Miriam asked the police if they suspected her of being guilty, to which they responded that they had some doubts about her story. In response, she produced a large stack of receipts from various locations in the city where she had made purchases on the day of the murder, as if to demonstrate that she had meticulously collected evidence to support her alibi. After questioning, Miriam's clothing from the night of the murder was collected and tested for gunpowder residue. She was then released. During the autopsy, the medical examiner discovered a gunshot wound to the back of Alan's head. No gunpowder residue was found on his skin. Alan died instantly from the wound, falling to the ground with bruising on his head, arms, and body. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting that he had been attacked by surprise. Toxicology revealed the presence of caffeine and nicotine, but no alcohol, illegal drugs, or prescription medications were detected. It was clear that this was a homicide. An expert determined that Alan had died several hours before the police arrived at the house, around 8 to 9 a.m. His wife left the house around that time, suggesting that she may have been involved in the crime, but there were no traces of blood or gunpowder on her clothes or hands. However, traces of gunpowder were found at the scene, suggesting that Miriam may have changed clothes and cleaned up. The police accessed Alan's cell phone. Earlier that morning, his daughter had called him to discuss some documents and a meeting to sign them. There were also calls from unknown numbers, possibly creditors who had contacted him after hearing about the tragedy. In addition, the phone had received many calls from friends and family. To gather more information, the police interviewed the housekeeper, who had known the Allen family for many years. The housekeeper had cleaned the house and had met Allen before his first wife died. She recalled that she had last been to their home on June 9, 2008, just one day before the murder. She confirmed that the door was usually unlocked, allowing her to enter and begin cleaning as usual. However, she noticed that Allen was acting unusually. He was normally very talkative, but that day he ignored her presence and did not even greet her. He seemed very nervous and did not make eye contact when he sat down at the table. Shortly after, a strange man arrived, leading her to believe that there was a problem in the couple's relationship. Unfortunately, she was unable to provide any further useful information. The police decided to look into Miriam's background and discovered some interesting information. After the tragic deaths of her daughter and husband, she faced legal troubles that forced her to sell her assets to settle lawsuits. When the police spoke to a family member, they learned that there were indeed financial problems, largely due to Miriam's extravagant spending habits. Allen was a successful businessman who provided generously for his children, but the purchase of a horse stable and a dance studio, along with the high cost of maintaining the horses, had left them financially devastated. The situation became even more suspicious when, on the same day his car caught fire, Miriam discovered that he had sold his business to pay off debts and had just received the money before they set off. Interestingly, Miriam had excused herself to go to the bathroom just before the fire broke out. It seemed that she had lost interest in her husband because of their financial troubles and decided to take his money and stay away from him. In addition, none of Allen's relatives were able to contact him in his final days. Allen's daughters felt that Miriam was trying to prevent them from reaching out to their father. The more the police spoke to Allen's relatives, the more inconsistencies and falsehoods they discovered in Miriam's testimony. At the time, the police believed that Miriam had a financial motive. However, Miriam claimed that she did not benefit from her husband's death due to their prenuptial agreement. According to the agreement, all of Allen's assets would be divided among the children, but the house they bought during their marriage was considered community property. This meant that Miriam could claim half of it if her husband died, which was a significant amount of money. Many witnesses believed that Allen's wife was the only person capable of killing him. Some suspected that his sudden decline in health shortly before his death was related to an attempted poisoning. These suspicions were partly supported by the fact that his symptoms were consistent with those of poisoning. However, an autopsy found no toxins in his system. It is possible that the toxins had been processed by his body during his long illness. Additionally, another daughter of Allen, who had been living with her father and stepmother for some time, observed Miriam using Allen's mobile phone without permission. Allen's daughter believed that Miriam had disconnected the phone, preventing Allen from contacting his family. This behavior became apparent during the time when Allen's relatives were unable to reach him. The police investigated the deaths of Miriam's daughter and her ex-husband, Jack Giles, and found them to be highly suspicious. The daughter died of a drug overdose, but it is unclear how she obtained the fatal dose. She had a close relationship with her father, but was estranged from her mother, which contributed to Jack's depression. He died 2 years later under unusual circumstances. He had been shot in the right side of the head, although he was left-handed. During this time, Miriam was the sole beneficiary of life insurance policies for both her daughter and Jack, leading the family to suspect a connection between their deaths. Miriam quickly received and spent the insurance money, but 6 months later, a court ordered her to give half of Jack's insurance money to his child from a previous relationship. After Jack's death, Miriam left Florida for Colorado, where she married Alan Hemlick. A disturbing development arose when it was revealed that she had a history of fraud, including attempts to cash counterfeit checks and being implicated in several burglaries. When police investigated her background, they discovered a long history of legal troubles in various states, where she had used multiple false identities to engage in illegal activities. Although she claimed that she would inherit nothing but the house if Alan died, police discovered a $250,000 life insurance policy in his name. Furthermore, shortly before Alan was murdered, Miriam attempted to increase the coverage to $2 million. However, when she tried to claim the money after Alan's death, she was informed that she could not do so because he had been late with his payments earlier in the year. The payment issue arose because Miriam had restricted Alan's use of his cell phone, causing him to miss payment reminders. 2 weeks after the murder, Miriam's best friend reported some disturbing experiences. Miriam called, sounding frightened, and explained that someone had broken into her home while she was at work. A friend offered her a place to stay. The next day, they decided to go to Alan's house together. There, they discovered a yellow envelope with a postcard hidden under the carpet. The postcard, written in a scrawl with many errors, ominously stated that Alan was the next victim, not the last, in Miriam's life. Feeling threatened, Miriam quickly contacted her lawyer. Although she feared for her life, she expressed concern that the letter writer might return to her home. She also mentioned seeing strange cars parked nearby and hearing unusual noises the night before the murder. Police examined the note and found it was written on a rare type of postcard, which led them to the place of purchase. Within days, they had surveillance footage confirming that Miriam had bought the postcard and sent it to herself. The store clerk even remembered her. The investigation revealed that Miriam had harmed her own parents. First, she robbed her father and even burned down his house. Then she went to her mother's house, who lived in another state, and robbed her before fleeing to Mississippi. Miriam had also stolen from Alan several times, leading to suspicious transactions on his account. A bank employee noticed these irregularities and tried to inform Alan, but he was unaware of the situation because his wife had hidden her phone. It was discovered that more than $140 had been withdrawn from Alan's account, although he had not made any significant purchases. This was unusual, as all of his associates stated that Alan often planned large purchases in advance and discussed them with his accountant. The day before his death, Alan appeared very upset, perhaps because he had learned about the unauthorized withdrawals, which could have caused him considerable stress. Could this situation have led to a murder? When the police decided to arrest Miriam for the murder, they discovered that she had left Colorado and was staying at her son's house in Florida. Miriam had taken her belongings from Alan's house with her. She quickly registered on a dating website, stating that she was looking for a wealthy man who earned at least $500,000 a year to meet her needs. During the investigation, police found several searches on Alan's computer related to horse euthanasia. There were numerous searches for medical drugs used for this purpose, including dosages of sleeping pills and poisons, along with information about their dangers. This was concerning because Alan had nothing to do with horses. It was his wife who cared for them. It appeared that she was the one searching for this information, raising suspicions that Alan may have been the victim of poisoning. Police suspicions were confirmed when it was learned that Miriam's family had no sick horses that needed euthanasia. On November 8, Miriam Giles was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution had a substantial amount of evidence for the case, but relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. It is believed that Miriam had been trying to kill her husband for a long time. She was also suspected of attempting to blow up Alan's car while he was inside it. This incident may have prompted the police to begin their investigation. At the time, the film No Country for Old Men was popular, featuring a villain who blows up a car. The prosecution theorized that Miriam had been inspired by the film and attempted to kill Alan in a similar manner. A DVD of the film was actually found in their home. On December 12, 2008, bail was set at $2 million, and Miriam remained in jail. It was discovered that she had used several forged documents, including a passport and a driver's license. The prosecutor insisted that her entire life had been based on deception. Many of her statements during interviews were presented to the jury, along with numerous instances of her lying and her extensive criminal record that contributed to Alan's death. However, the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence to support the murder charge. The defense argued that there was no concrete evidence that Miriam used a gun to shoot her husband, and that the murder weapon was never found. After witnessing the defense's desperate attempts to prove Miriam's innocence, the jury ultimately found her guilty. Miriam Giles was convicted of first-degree murder and arson of her father's house, in addition to multiple counts of document forgery. After a brief deliberation, the court sentenced Miriam to 108 years in prison. The prosecutor's office then attempted to charge her with the murder of her first husband, Jack, as she was the prime suspect. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation was deemed insufficient, and no charges were filed. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sydney Stevens. Pinckneyville, located in the United States, is a small town known for its friendly local community and laid-back lifestyle. It is also a great place for fishing enthusiasts. On July 25, 2010, two fishermen were fishing in the near Boku Creek Bridge south of Pinckneyville when they spotted a strange object in the water. Approaching it, they realized it was the body of a girl floating face down. Her right arm was tied with a rope to a concrete block, but the body had risen to the surface due to decomposition and shallow water. The body was in a deteriorated state, making identification difficult. The only clues were a belly piercing and a necklace with a musical note pendant. After checking the information in the database, law enforcement officers discovered that a similar girl had recently disappeared. She was Sydney Stevens, 15, who had gone missing on July 19, 2010, exactly 1 week before body was discovered. Sydney's parents, Tracy and Tim, said she had recently suffered from mental health issues after learning that they had separated shortly before she went missing. She was shocked to learn that Tim, the man who raised her, was not her biological father. This revelation led to a mental disorder and severe depression. She ran away from home multiple times, isolated herself from friends, and even attempted ending her life. To protect her, the family decided to keep her at home under supervision. At this time, she was either cared for by her mother, Tim, or her 17-year-old half-sister, Dakota Wall. The house doors were kept locked, and everything was under control until the morning of July 20th, when her mother found she missing at 6:30 a.m. Tracy suspected something was wrong because Sydney's room was in complete disarray, the dresser was overturned, and belongings were scattered everywhere. She called Dakota, who suggested Sydney had run away again. However, Tracy's concern grew when she saw that Sydney was not logged into social media since the previous evening, which was unusual. Upon inspecting the room, she noticed all of Sydney's personal items were still there, including her purse, phone, shoes, and clothes. It didn't seem like she had run away, it was as if she had left in her pajamas and without shoes. Tracy attempted to locate Sydney but was unsuccessful. Sydney's friends were also unaware of her whereabouts, so Tracy filed a missing Sydney report with the police. The detectives were initially hesitant to take on this case. They knew Sydney had problems, so they thought she just ran away from home again and would come back home later. Therefore, investigators shelved Tracy's testimony and only her relatives and friends participated in the search for her. They searched, but in vain. A week later, on July 25, 2010, her body was discovered underwater. Her mother, Tracy, was summoned to the police station to identify her. Tracy immediately recognized her daughter's jewelry and confirmed a belly piercing. Dental records definitively identified the body as Sydney's. Once the body is identified, police need to determine what happened to her. The autopsy revealed shocking details, that is, Sydney was murdered. Forensic experts found evidence of multiple injuries, including gunshot wounds and signs of a violent death. This thing stunned everyone. They could not understand why the suspect could target the young girl in such a brutal way. The day before Sydney disappeared, she had planned to go on a hike with her friends, but her mother did not allow it, which made her very sad. She spent the entire day alone under house arrest. When police investigated the house, they found no signs of a break-in. The doors were always kept closed, suggesting that either a family member let the kidnappers in, or they had a key. The relatives insisted they didn't give keys to any strangers. At the time of the incident, only Tracy and Dakota were in the house. The police began questioning the closest relatives, friends, and Sydney's acquaintance, as those close to the victim are often involved in such crimes. Due to the violent nature of the crime, the investigators suspected a personal motive. Tracy reported coming home around 10 p.m. At that time, Sydney was in one room watching TV. Tracy had taken prescribed medication to sleep in her room. Tim was not home that night. He was on a business trip. The most scrutinized individuals were Sydney's sister, Dakota, and her boyfriend, Chad Bennett, who is 20 years old. They both denied any connection to the crime. Dakota stated that she saw Chad the day before, when he visited her to watch a movie, after which he went to work. Chad confirmed her account. However, detectives were suspicious of Chad because he had a criminal record, which included possession of illegal substances and petty theft. As a result, the police brought in his accomplices for questioning: Carl Dane, 18, James Glazier, 17, and Robbie Mueller, 15. All three were friends with Dakota, the old sister of Sydney. During questioning, the young men were evasive and inconsistent in their statements. Ultimately, they told a similar story but with different details. According to their accounts, on the night of July 19, 2010, Carl, James, and Robbie went to Sydney's house. They had a brutal plan as part of their group ceremony, which required performing an evil deed. The plan was to kill Sydney's mother, Tracy, without leaving any evidence. However, as they were moving around house, Sydney woke up, stepped into the hallway, and called for her mother. The attackers stopped her in time, preventing her from making any noise. They held her mouth and nose so tightly that she lost consciousness. Then, they decide that killing Sydney is enough for their initiation ceremony and they choose not to harm Tracy. They carried her body to the car, but she regained consciousness. They continued to torture, beat, and strangle her until she passed out again. They then disposed of her by dumping her into the water, tying a concrete block to her body so it would sink and so that no one can find the body. However, this plan backfired because, during decomposition, gases are formed, causing the body to eventually float. All three individuals, Carl, James, and Robbie, were arrested on July 28. Their story seemed highly implausible. They initially intended to kill Tracy, but instead killed Sydney. Something was evidently amiss. The police suspected that, besides this heinous crime, they might have raped she, as her trousers were down when the body was discovered. However, none of the suspects admitted to this act. The body's condition was poor because the water had erased all evidence, so the police can't confirm this. About the lowered trousers, they denied rape, they suggesting it was related to the influence of illegal substances. Law enforcement knew that gangs have a hierarchy and strict discipline. Although Chad, the leader, denied his guilt, it was inevitable that he was involved in this crime. In fact, the attack could only have been carried out with his approval, especially since he could not avoid participating in the initiation everyone was talking about. It was known that Sidney had gunshot wounds, but members of Chad's team chose not to mention it, resulting in their statements being unreliable. Sidney was shot with a .22 caliber pistol. Carl, a member of Chad's group, who had once met Sidney, possessed a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. This weapon was quite costly, and Carl claimed he couldn't afford it, saying Chad had given it to him. Under the pressure of skilled police questioning, members of Chad's team admitted that he directed their actions. They agreed to testify against he, even though he continued to deny any involvement in the crime. Consequently, Chad was also arrested, though the police suspected there were more people involved in Sidney's murder. They believed Dakota might have been part of it, but she continued to deny any involvement, asserting that she loved her sister and they had a good relationship. Detectives continued their investigation after noticing many inconsistencies in the story. When speaking with the Sidney family's relatives and friends, detectives discovered that Dakota actually despised Sidney. She usually tries to join Dakota in group activities, which annoyed the group, especially Dakota. Dakota wants to spend more time with her boyfriend, Chad, instead of with her. However, Dakota was responsible for looking after she while their parents were at work and also have to clean and do other housework. Dakota couldn't get rid of Sidney, so she had to put up with it. At Sidney's funeral, Dakota appeared happy during the service. She smiled casually and chatted cheerfully with everyone who came to pay their respects. She seemed unaffected by her younger sister's passing. Police followed Dakota and they later questioned her for several hours. The detectives intentionally confused her with unexpected questions to catch her in a lie. Eventually, she began to disclose some details. She admitted that during a trip to another city, Nashville, she overheard her friends from the group discussing what had happened. This was on July 21st, just 2 days after Sidney disappeared. She said 2 members of the group, James and Carl, were talking about the murder. At first, she thought they were referring to someone else since Sidney's body had not yet been found, but then she realized they were speaking about her 15-year-old sister, Sidney. They discussed how they beat, strangled, and drowned Sidney, then tying body to a concrete block. Dakota began her story by explaining that on July 23rd, she was with Chad's group at Carl's house, where she overheard a conversation about the murder. Carl mentioned having a gun and he shot someone with that gun. Under police pressure, Dakota disclosed more details, admitting that she knew who was in a car parked near the house on the night Sidney disappeared. These individuals were members of Chad's group. They entered the house and did something to Sidney. She confessed this to the officer, but explained that she had been too afraid of they to speak up earlier. However, Dakota's account was becoming inconsistent. In her new testimony, she alleged that Carl had threatened her life if she informed the police. The officers noted her lack of emotion and how careful she was in giving her testimony. Investigators knew that she seemed pleased about Sidney's death, casting doubt on her innocence. To probe further, the police pretended to know everything about the crime, including Dakota's relevance, but claimed they were unclear about the motive. This unsettled she, yet she did not confess to any wrongdoing. The case garnered public attention. They intensely discussed the shocking crime. Rumors circulated widely, including one claiming that Dakota discovered Sidney's diary a few days before the crime, revealing that Sidney had slept with her boyfriend, Chad, 2 years earlier. It is important to mention that 2 years earlier, Dakota had not met Chad, yet this might have infuriated her as Sydney's older sister. However, the romantic relationship, especially between Sydney and Chad, was never verified and was doubtful to investigators since Sydney was only 13 at the time. Although this motive wasn't confirmed, there were several other possible reasons for the murder. The following day, Dakota was called in for questioning again. She alleged that her boyfriend, Chad, who was accused of the crime, had shown disturbing behavior. He was aggressive and often lost control, attacking people frequently. It seems that he cannot avoid committing a serious crime. He had a conflict with Sydney's ex-boyfriend, Bubby. According to Chad's testimony, he heard voices urging him to attack his family. He even set their house on fire. He also allegedly shot his favorite cat, hitting it with 15 bullets. None of these claims were verified. Detectives also knew that at 10 p.m. on the night of Sydney's disappearance, Dakota called he. It's believed that the group members arrived at her house then, possibly asking Dakota to open the door or planning something before the attack. Dakota did not answer the police's questions about Sydney's murder, and it seems she is deliberately trying to mislead the investigation. As a result, she was arrested for obstruction of justice. However, at that time, the police did not have enough evidence to proceed with a trial. Chad admitted to being the leader of a gang called the City Saints, whose members followed his orders without question. This thing might have endangered Sydney's life. Chad, however, insisted that he never ordered the murder of Sydney and denied any involvement, even expressing regret over the incident. Meanwhile, Carl participated in interrogations for 2 days as the prosecution prepared for the trial. He recounted that on the night of Sydney's disappearance, he had been drinking at night. Then, Robbie, also drunk, came to see him and suggested going somewhere. Carl agreed without asking for details and to feel secure and took a .22 caliber pistol with him. Carl was very emotional during the interrogation and openly cried. This made the detectives question whether he was an accomplice to a terrible murder or no. It was possible that he went for a walk without knowing Robbie planned to kill Sydney. However, the police were skeptical about his tears, as they could be a sign of remorse or a disguise. Carl stated that they picked up James on the way and drove to the Sydney family's house. Robbie climbed over the fence and entered the house while everyone was asleep and Carl waiting outside in the car. After some time, he became worried because they were taking too long. He claimed he went inside to find his friends and leave together. The door from the courtyard was open, providing direct access to the basement where Sydney lived. The police were suspicious that the door might have been unlocked at night, especially since there were no signs of forced entry. It seemed likely that someone helped the criminals approach Sydney unnoticed. Suspicion falls on her sister, Dakota. Carl explained that when they entered the property, they noticed that Sydney had woken up due to the noise. She recognized both criminals, Robbie and James. She asked what they were doing here. Then, she tried to wake her mother and call for help. However, Robbie attacked she, although she resisted, but they overpowered her. He threw her onto the couch and tied her hands, but she fought back fiercely. He then pointed a gun at her. Likely due to the shock and injuries from the struggle, so she lost consciousness. They were aware of her mental health challenges and her history of running away from home, so they decided to make it look like she had run away again. They removed she from the house through the open door, dragged her to their car, and drove off with her to ensure she wouldn't be found. Halfway through the journey, Sydney regained consciousness and began to resist desperately. Immediately after that, one of the attackers forced her to the ground and strangled her. He kept her in that position for a long time, until she passed out again. They then took she to a river by car, but she regained consciousness again midway. During this time, they claimed that she expressed a desire for intimacy, and they had intimate relations with her. And the strangulation may have been part of a perverted game. Subsequently, Sydney was shot in anger and thrown into the water. However, this testimony of incident was met with disbelief. It was obvious that the intimate intercourse was not of her own volition. Robbie presented a different account to the police. He stated that Carl played a significant role in torturing the girl. Carl had previously been in a brief 3-day relationship with she, but then she broke up with him because he didn't care about her, after which she began seeing someone else. Afterward, he vowed to take revenge on all the girls who betrayed him, starting with Sydney. At that time, no one expected his anger to lead things so far. Robbie, the youngest in the group, at just 15, insisted that he hadn't harmed anyone. As a new member, he simply followed the others and did what they told him, staying within the boundaries of what was allowed. On October 5, 2012, Chad's group members disclosed new information about the case. The police finally gathered enough evidence to build a full case and charge the group members. That day, they questioned Dakota to understand how the door to Sydney's room could have been left open at night. It's known that due to her mental illness, she could pose a danger to herself. Her mother ensured that she couldn't leave by keeping the door always locked. Sydney was under house arrest during all of this. It became evident that the incident was neither accidental nor mistaken because her mother and Dakota were meant to supervise every evening. During questioning, the police were able to get Dakota to confess. She admitted she left the door open, intending to play a prank on her sister, coordinated with members of the group. Finally, the police obtained this long-hidden confession. Later, Dakota disclosed another crucial detail. Before the crime, she had a meeting with Chad's team members, where they discussed their plans. She admitted they intended to kill Sydney. With this information, everything became clear. Even if Dakota didn't directly participate in the murder of Sydney, she was aware of it and did nothing to prevent it. She knew what was going to happen, so leaving the door unlocked wasn't accidental. She planned it to allow the attackers to enter the house and killed Sydney. Investigators believe Dakota underwent a brutal ordeal to join Chad's group, which explained her aided the killers. Her cheerful behavior at her younger sister's funeral was because she completed the ritual to join the group and get rid of her annoying younger sister. Then, their group celebrated after the murder. Carl later acknowledged his guilt, writing an apology letter to Sydney's mother, Tracy, on August 18, 2010. He admitted that he had done evil and now had to pay with his freedom. Even though he knew that it couldn't bring Sydney back to life, but he asked for forgiveness. Tracy read the letter and believed Carl showed no remorse. Although he was arrested early in the investigation, it took 2 years for them to appear in court. Carl Dane pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received the 60-year prison sentence. However, before being transferred to a federal prison, he was discovered dead in his cell, with a note expressing regret for his actions. Another member of the group, James, was also found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 60 years. Robbie Mueller initially sentenced to 37 years, but his sentence was reduced to 26 years after an appeal. He will be eligible for parole in late 2023. The gang leader, Chad Bennett, cooperated with investigators and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, resulting in a 20-year sentence. He took a plea deal and will be eligible for parole in 2026. Dakota received a 26-year prison sentence, with the ability to apply for first parole by the end of 2023. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Andrea Del Vesco. Andrea Del Vesco was born in Chicago, USA, in 1994. Her parents, Arthur and Leslie. Her older brother, James, was 2 years old at her birth, and her younger sister, Alexis, was born 4 years later. The family was happy and loving, moving several times before settling in Austin, Texas. Andrea's mother, Leslie, studied financial marketing at Southern Methodist University. She worked for American Airlines and then as a customer service manager in the mortgage division of Citibank. Andrea's father, Arthur, managed the family's assets as the owner of an investment firm. His hard work helped the family become quite wealthy, allowing them to live comfortably. The family's wealth enabled them to send all their children to university. Before that, the children attended a private school with a rigorous academic program taught by the best teachers in the state. From an early age, they engaged in a wide range of activities, from sports to religion, which helped instill high moral values in them. Andrea excelled academically, played sports, and developed in a well-rounded manner. She loved visiting museums and learning about art. She is kind and caring towards those around her. She has a particularly close relationship with her mother. From a young age, Andrea and her family traveled a lot, which broadened her horizons and exposed her to many different people and cultures. As she grew up, Andrea became her parents' hope and pride. In 2012, after finishing school, she applied to several educational institutions simultaneously. Her parents hoped she would attend the University of Chicago, where her older brother was studying, and for a while, Andrea preferred this option too. However, she decided to wait until she received responses from all the schools she applied to before making a decision. Ultimately, she chose the psychology department at the University of California, Los Angeles. By 2022, this university was ranked among the best in America. It has always been highly regarded and prestigious, with highly qualified teachers and a strong scientific and technical foundation. This choice reassured her family. Andrea then moved to Los Angeles to attend school. Her parents were happy with her decision and supported her choice, although they were worried that she would be too far away. Her brother would no longer be able to take care of her. With the support of her family, she began her new life. Upon arrival, Andrea needed to choose a club to join, which helped her develop lasting friendships and gain support from more experienced students. To become a full member, one usually needed to pass a test and make a small donation. The student community was very close-knit, with many students living so openly that they left their doors unlocked, allowing them to visit each other freely. Although it was generally safe, incidents could still occur. Andrea happily joined the club. She had a great sense of humor, was good-looking, and dressed well. Her impeccable style made her popular. She also created many extravagant outfits that amazed everyone. Andrea was the center of attention at any party. However, she balanced her social life with her studies. After completing her freshman year, she got a job as a paralegal at a law firm in Brentwood, handling administrative tasks. This job did not fit her schedule, so she found a new part-time job. She kept changing jobs to better balance her work and studies, allowing her to have pocket money and not have to depend on her parents. Andrea continued her student life until she graduated in 2015. She always dreamed of traveling after finishing her studies. As her senior year approached, she lived in a dormitory just 5 minutes away from the main university building. This dorm is a great place for students, hosting many sorority parties and university events. Andrea shares her living space with her sorority friends and a small dog she adopted from a rescue. She loves her pet so much that she even has a social media page dedicated to posting cute pictures of it. One day, the dog goes missing, leaving Andrea devastated as she searches frantically for it. Luckily, her beloved dog is found 5 days later. In September, Andrea is preparing to start her senior year of college, with classes scheduled to begin on September 24th. However, the fall semester officially starts on the 21st. On the 19th, she shares one of her favorite music videos on her social media page. The very next day, September 20th, 2015, is the last day before the girls in the club return to school. Everyone was having fun on the balcony of the apartment building. Andrea was at a club activity until 3 in the morning with her friend Jessica. Jessica then went to her bedroom around 3:30 and went to sleep, while Andrea lay on the couch in the living room. However, Andrea could not sleep that night. A few hours later, Samantha, another neighbor, came running to Andrea's door, screaming about a fire. Andrea's door was closed, which was unusual because she always left her room open for her friends in the club. Samantha tried to open the door but couldn't, so she called the other girls to help. Together, with great difficulty, they managed to open the door and found the room filled with smoke and fire. They found Andrea lying motionless on the bed but could not call her because of the danger. Realizing that they could not safely enter the room, the girls evacuated and called 9 people at a time. They waited on the sidewalk for help. Later, the fire truck arrived at the scene. Firefighters quickly used hoses to extinguish the fire on the second floor. A total of 32 firefighters worked to effectively extinguish the fire. After the incident, rumors spread among the students that Andrea was dead, as she had not escaped the building and was not seen. When the firefighters finally entered the room, they found the body of a woman lying on her bed. During the investigation, the police determined that the fire started in Andrea's bedroom. At the scene, the police were unable to identify the deceased because her face was disfigured by the fire. They were only able to confirm that it was a female body. Fingerprints could not be taken because her hands were too badly burned. Surprisingly, the girl's small dog was found by firefighters. The dog was severely burned, barely breathing at the feet of its owner. However, it was later decided to euthanize the dog to reduce its suffering. After the incident, the dormitory students were relocated to different housing while repairs started on the burned building. The girls were frightened, leading the university to enhance campus security. Everyone believed that Andrea was the victim of the fire since all other students were confirmed safe during roll call. They reported seeing Andrea lying on her bed in the room that was on fire and were puzzled as to why she did not get up and leave. They found it odd and speculated that she might have lost consciousness, suffocated from carbon monoxide, or had already died. Andrea's parents returned to Austin from a long trip, unaware of what had happened to their daughter. They began to worry when Andrea did not reach out to them, and their attempts to contact her were unsuccessful. Concerned, her mother called one of their neighbors and learned about the fire, which might have involved Andrea. However, the police had not yet confirmed the identity of the body found at the scene. The entire family gathered to pray for Andrea's safety and traveled to Los Angeles. Meanwhile, police began investigating the case. They discovered that Jessica, Andrea's neighbor, was the last person to communicate with her before the tragedy. Police planned to interview Jessica to gather details about their last conversation, hoping she might have witnessed something important. Police interviewed Jessica to learn how the fire started, but her answers were not helpful. She quickly stated that she saw nothing and had no idea what caused the fire. Friends from the sisterhood, who also spoke with the police, suggested that Andrea may have accidentally fallen asleep with an aromatic candle still lit. They were convinced that the fire was not set intentionally, as Andrea had no enemies or anyone who wished her harm. To verify this theory, a detailed examination of the incident scene was needed. Initially, they inspected electrical appliances and outlets for any short circuits, but everything appeared to be in order. No candles were found at the scene, and the only item that raised suspicion was the trash can located at the head of the bed. Experienced firefighters speculated that this could be the starting point of the fire. However, friends and members of the sisterhood confirmed that Andrea never slept near the trash can, which was typically placed at the opposite end of the room. Unfortunately, the contents of the can could not be identified without a detailed chemical analysis, as everything was completely destroyed. Forensic experts specializing in arson were called in to investigate. 2 hours after the fire was put out, police were convinced that it was not accidental. The critical piece of evidence was a metal trash can, which someone could have used to pour flammable liquid and ignite a fire. The flames originated near the head of the girl's bed and spread throughout the room. Forensic experts confirmed their suspicions when it was clear that the fire was intentionally set. The investigation at the crime scene intensified. Forensic experts found a large number of traces of blood splashes on the bed and around it, with most of the stains surviving the fire. Police were concerned when neighbors reported trying to call the Andrea as they entered her room at the start of the fire, but she did not respond and was found lying motionless. They feared she was already dead and suspected that the perpetrator had set the fire to destroy evidence. By this time, the police had already pieced together a rough timeline of the events from that tragic evening. They interviewed many students, focusing mainly on the roommates. According to the roommates, a group of girls had been chatting on the balcony before entering the apartment building. The last confirmed sighting of Andrea alive was at 5:50 a.m. Samantha, her roommate, was preparing for work on campus and saw that Andrea was sleeping on the couch in the living room at that time. Samantha left for work and returned around 6:30 a.m., but Andrea was no longer on the couch. She had gone to her room, but this time her door was closed, which was unusual for her. This behavior struck Samantha as odd, and she wondered why Andrea had suddenly gone to her room and shut the door, especially after being fast asleep before. Feeling concerned, Samantha noted this difference when she then saw the fire. While talking to other students in the dorm, the police discovered a significant clue. A girl named Sarah returned to her room around 5:30 a.m. after dropping her boyfriend off at the airport. Her apartment was directly above Andrea's room. Since it was still dark at that hour, Sarah noticed a male figure as she tried to open her front door. The building was for women, but it wasn't unusual for guys to visit their girlfriends, so she didn't think much of it at first. However, she became alarmed when the man immediately ran away upon seeing her, as if he was trying to hide. This frightened and confused her. She described the man as wearing a black baseball cap, a black and white t-shirt, and dark jeans. Feeling scared, Sarah hurried into her room and locked the door. Once inside, she quickly texted her boyfriend to tell him about the suspicious man she had seen. Unsure whether he posed a threat or if she should contact the police, she shared her concerns. Her boyfriend reassured her that it was likely just someone visiting, suggesting there was no need to panic. Later Sarah went to bed, but around 6:15, she was awakened by a woman's scream and the frantic barking of a dog from the room below her, where Andrea lived. This startled her, especially since the dog had never barked before and usually stayed calm. She realized something was wrong downstairs. Sarah tried to reach Andrea to check on her, but couldn't get in touch. She called 911, but the emergency services didn't take her seriously because the area was known for its student parties and noise. Still, a patrol car was dispatched to the dormitory. The police arrived around 6:23 but left a few minutes later without updating Sarah on their findings. They reported seeing nothing unusual, no person, no barking dog, and no screams. They only shined their flashlights into Andrea's room from the street without conducting a thorough investigation. Believing that someone might have had too much to drink or had an argument that upset the dog, the police decided to leave. Meanwhile, Sarah was watching from the window and tried calling Andrea, but no one answered. She also tried to contact the other girls in the building, but it seemed that everyone was asleep. After the police left, she heard a loud bang at around 6:45 a.m. Sarah rushed to the balcony and looked down, seeing thick smoke rising. She also spotted a stranger in a black and white t-shirt jumping from the balcony below. Panicking, Sarah feared that the man had harmed Andrea. She quickly grabbed her phone and called 911 to report the situation, then ran downstairs, where other students had gathered near Andrea's room, trying to open the door. Sarah quickly left the building to chase the intruder. She spotted him and ran after him down the street, but he escaped by getting into a red Nissan and driving away. Sarah recalled a detail on the car window that had a fraternity sticker. Meanwhile, Andrea's friends had made it into her room. They called out to her, but there was no response. The students claimed they saw her lying motionless on her bed, surrounded by flames. Several girls noticed blood on her neck, chest, and shoulders. In a panic, the friends left the burning house and saw the red Nissan speeding away, with Sarah in pursuit. However, none of Andrea's friends could identify anyone who might have wanted to harm her. All of her friends had cared for her, and at the time of her death, she was not in a romantic relationship. The investigation looked into the possibility of a robbery, but nothing was stolen from Andrea's room. It is thought that Andrea may have met someone on Tinder and the date did not go well. But this has not been confirmed as there are no leads. The police reviewed the surveillance footage from the campus, but it was unhelpful because of its poor quality. They searched all nearby streets for a red Nissan car with a fraternity sticker that had been spotted near the crime scene. Police interviewed all the students, focusing on fraternity members and residents of nearby homes. Nicholas and Mohair later reported a burglary, claiming that their laptops and speakers had been stolen, and one of them said that the keys to his red Nissan were also missing. This occurred on the same evening as Andrea's murder. A few days after the fire, police officially identified the charred remains as belonging to 21-year-old Andrea Delvesco, using dental records provided by her family. An autopsy conducted on September 22 indicated that she was wearing only a sports bra at the time of her death, which raised suspicions of rape, although this could not be confirmed due to the condition of her body. Most of her hair had been burned away, and there was significant blood loss, particularly from the back of her head. Approximately 90% of her body was burned. Forensic experts found multiple fatal stab wounds on Andrea's body, mainly to her head and neck. She had 5 stab wounds on the right side of her neck and 2 on the left, for a total of 19 stab wounds. The lack of soot and carbon monoxide in her body suggests that Andrea was dead before the fire started. This suggests that the fire was an attempt to cover up the crime rather than the cause of death. As a result, the investigation was upgraded to a murder case, creating a sense of fear across the campus. On the day the official forensic report was made public, police traced a stolen laptop and speakers to a man named Joseph in Fresno, California, which is over 3 hours from the crime scene. Police quickly going to his address. When police met Joseph, he claimed that he had borrowed the speakers from his roommate and that he had done nothing wrong. The situation became more complicated when the stolen items were passed around. His friend was Alberto Medina. Alberto claimed that he had lent the items to Joseph, explaining that his friends, who were moving out, had given them to him for safekeeping. However, Alberto then disappeared. Police began searching for Alberto on September 24th. He was arrested 2 days later and brought in for questioning. Alberto's testimony was inconsistent. He said that on September 18th, he went to the University of California with his friend Eric Marquez. They spent the week together, attending a Chris Brown concert and then going to a party with friends who had laptops and speakers. Under pressure from police, Alberto eventually confessed that he had stolen the items from random people while intoxicated and unaware of his actions, and returned home around 5:30 a.m. The police noted that the fire had not started at that time. When questioned about a suspicious stranger, Alberto unexpectedly claimed he was attacked by someone with a gun while they were returning with the stolen items. The attacker fired at them but missed, allowing them to escape. Alberto described the attacker as wearing dark jeans and a black and white t-shirt, matching the description Sarah had previously given. However, the police still expressed doubts about Alberto's story. Alberto suddenly remembered that his friend Eric had visited Andrea, a beautiful blonde woman he met at a party that same weekend. Eric planned to be intimate with her. When Eric returns to the apartment, he acts strange and nervous. Eric says he hit her and urges Alberto to leave quickly. Alberto's account implicates Eric in Andrea's murder. 5 days after the murder, the police interviewed a new suspect named Eric Marquez. He was 22 years old and a fifth-year medical student at the university. Eric had no previous legal problems and was viewed as a good person. His friend Alberto pointed the police to his home, which was only a 5-minute walk from the crime scene. However, getting Eric to confess was challenging. He stated that he spent the entire weekend drinking at home and hardly went out. Alberto and Eric's testimony was confirmed by surveillance camera footage from their home. When the footage was reviewed, both Eric and Alberto were active from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m., frequently wandering the streets. Alberto was wearing a black and white t-shirt and dark jeans. At 4 a.m., Alberto and Eric left the house for an extended period of time. Alberto was easily recognized by the distinctive tattoos on his arms. A key moment in the footage is Alberto returning to the apartment at around 7:11 a.m., with Andrea's red blanket wrapped around him. This corresponds to the time of the arson. Additionally, a red Nissan, matching Sarah's description, was spotted on video. By 7:30 a.m., Alberto and Eric were seen leaving the house again to throw away some trash. At this time, Alberto was shirtless and Eric had changed his clothing. While the cameras captured this evidence, Eric insisted he could not remember anything. Police obtained a search warrant for Alberto and Eric's apartment. A thorough inspection revealed that Alberto had suffered abrasions to his hands, while Eric had no similar injuries. Police found the red Nissan, which had blood on the steering wheel, dashboard, and driver's door, along with trash and a black sock inside. In the apartment's closet, police discovered a trash bag filled with bloody clothing, Andrea's underwear, and a black sock that matched the sock found in the car, a bloody knife, and a blanket missing from Andrea's room. After conducting the inspection, police gathered enough evidence to formally charge Alberto and Eric. On September 28, Alberto and Eric were charged with murder and burglary, and Albert was additionally charged with arson. Despite the threat of the death penalty, both pleaded not guilty. Their families insisted on a thorough, independent investigation, unable to accept that their son could have committed such a heinous act. Police later interviewed Joseph Garcia, who was found using a stolen laptop and speakers. He claimed that he had witnessed Alberto and Eric returning home that evening. Alberto had confided in him about the incident at the dormitory. He had entered Andrea's room after watching her while she walked her dog, then snuck inside. Alberto took a knife from the kitchen, forced Andrea into the room, and locked the door. He raped her, and when she screamed and fought back, he stabbed her to death and burned the house to cover up his crime. Alberto threatened Joseph to keep quiet. An expert found DNA evidence that showed blood on the suspect's clothes and car matched Andrea's DNA. Additionally, a witness named Julio, a cleaner, observed Alberto getting out of his car and walking toward Andrea's dorm. Julio noted that Alberto had a large tattoo on his arm and was wearing a black and white t-shirt. Alberto and Eric both appeared drunk and said they needed to go to Andrea's room because she needed help. Police determined that Alberto had entered the building while Eric was still in the car, so the blood was only found on the driver's side. Andrea's family was outraged by the police's inaction when Sarah first raised her concerns. The officers neglected to check Andrea's room, the likely scene of the crime. The Los Angeles Police Department announced that the officers involved have been suspended and an internal investigation has been launched to look into their negligence in responding to a call from the victim's friend, Sarah. The findings of that investigation have been submitted to the court. Although the officers were acquitted but were still fired. In the fall of 2016, Eric went on trial for his role in Andrea's murder, along with charges of robbery and arson. Eric and Alberto were charged with animal cruelty due to the injuries Andrea's dog suffered in the fire. In September 2017, the possibility of the death penalty was considered for Alberto. His attorneys urged him to accept a plea deal to receive a lighter sentence and avoid the death penalty, but he refused. As a result, the case was split into two separate trials. Eric was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months after pleading guilty to accessory and abetting. It was determined that he did not participate in the murder or arson. He remained in the car throughout the incident. Alberto Medina's trial began on May 15, 2018. He faced a jury on 5 different charges. Despite this, Alberto chose not to accept the plea deal offered by the prosecution. On May 24, 2018, after extensive deliberation, Alberto pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, arson, animal cruelty, and burglary. The judge decided against the death penalty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, the court imposed another 12 years for other charges. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ellie Nessler. In the small town of Jamestown, California, Daniel Mark Driver was on trial for child abuse. One of Daniel's victims was William Nellayer, a defenseless child. William's mother, Ellie, felt that the justice system had failed to protect her son, so Ellie took matters into her own hands with a gun. The case sparked widespread debate, with some people fully supporting Ellie, while others criticized her actions. Ultimately, the discussion surrounding the case attracted national attention. Jamestown was a small, quiet town with a population of about 3,500 at the time of the incident. Ellie was the eldest of 3 daughters. Her parents were hardworking miners who taught Ellie the importance of self-reliance from a young age. As a result, she grew up to be strong and independent. During her teenage years, Ellie began to help her family by looking for work. It was a tough economic time. She took on various jobs to supplement her income. She also helped her parents by taking care of her younger siblings. When Ellie turned 20, she fell in love with a guy she met, and they quickly entered a romantic relationship. Soon after, they got married, but their marriage ended in divorce shortly thereafter. Her next partner was Bill, who worked as a miner. Additionally, Bill operated construction equipment, allowing him to earn a good income. They married in 1982 and soon welcomed a son named William. Bill grew up in an area that was once the center of the gold rush. As a child, he had listened to stories of old men panning for gold in the river, which inspired him to seek their adventure, even though the land was largely depleted by then. In search of better fortune, Bill and his family traveled to Liberia, West Africa, during the gold rush. While Bill was prospecting for gold, Ellie gave birth to their daughter, Rebecca. Unfortunately, Rebecca's early years were not peaceful. Suddenly, shortly after her birth, civil war broke out in Liberia. As a result, Ellie and the children returned to Jamestown, while Bill remained in West Africa, determined to make his fortune mining gold. During this time, Ellie faced numerous challenges in the United States. She received no support from Bill, and although she was a strong and independent woman, managing a household and caring for 2 young children proved to be very difficult for her. They relied on government assistance and occasional jobs that Ellie managed to find. During this period, she received support from her family and the church, which she attended regularly with her children and sister. Her mother often advised her to be self-reliant but also to carry a gun in her handbag for protection. Ellie took this lesson to heart. Despite her delicate appearance, she was always prepared to defend herself and, if needed, to take the initiative in a confrontation. This aspect of her character would later lead to tragic consequences. Ellie is very close to her children and does not let them go far. This protectiveness stems from her own traumatic experience as a child, when she was molested by an adult man. After she confided in her mother reacted violently and threatened him to leave town. This incident left Ellie with lasting psychological scars that she has struggled with throughout her life. She fears that her children may face similar dangers. When her son William went to summer camp away from home, she felt very anxious and scared. Despite her worries, William kept asking his mother to let him go to the summer camp organized by the church. Ellie was very anxious about letting her son spend time with others without her supervision. She hadn't even allowed him to sleep over at friends' houses. Eventually, her sister Jenna reassured her, explaining that she knew the camp organizers well and described them as respectable and good people. After thinking it over, Ellie finally agreed to let her son go, hoping he would enjoy himself. William spent 3 weeks at a church-run tent camp. After returning from the summer camp, Ellie noticed a change in William's behavior. William became aggressive, often sad, and stopped communicating. Ellie sensed that something was bothering him. Despite her and her family's efforts to find out what was happening at the camp, William refused to discuss it with adults. He insisted on being treated like an adult and wanted them to stop asking him questions. Younger sister Rebecca and his mother thought he was trying to imitate the older teenagers he had met at the camp. When the new school year started a few weeks later, everyone thought William was settling in well with his friends. However, when he returned to class, things did not improve. He began to withdraw from his family and became more aggressive with his classmates, rarely interacting with others. His anger often became uncontrollable, and these incidents had increased since he had been at the camp. Ellie was confused by William's changes, and it took her over a year to discover the reason behind them. Unfortunately, the truth behind it was quite heartbreaking. Daniel Mark Driver, a 30-year-old man who attended the same church as Ellie and her children, had recently moved in with his mother, who lived nearby. He was considered a good man and an active member of the church, known for his community involvement and willingness to help other parishioners. He always carried a Bible with him and could easily recite passages from it. Daniel took on the role of kitchen staff at the summer camp and also helped supervise the children, who always spoke positively of him. He is a natural psychologist. According to his parents, Daniel can help solve any difficult situation. Students often come to him to confide in him when they are in trouble. Many boys who do not have fathers consider Daniel as a father figure. With his persuasive skills, he can talk to any teenager. William experienced a significant change in his relationship with Daniel. William used to enjoy spending time with Daniel and interacting with him. But after returning from summer camp, William became noticeably anxious even during casual encounters. During this time, William often argued with his sister Rebecca, seemingly starting conflicts for no reason, and William also began to defy his mother. He had never argued with Ellie before, but now he became increasingly defiant. Occasionally, William's Aunt Jen, who was very close to the family, would take William to her home for the weekend. This gave his mother a break. About 9 months after the camp, Jen took William to her home for a weekend. During his stay, he had the opportunity to spend time with his cousins. Each time, Jen tried to discuss the major changes in his behavior, but William was quiet and avoided answering her questions. However, he later confided in her a secret, insisting that she not tell anyone, not even his mother. Jen agreed to keep it a secret. 7-year-old William shared his experience while he was at summer camp. Daniel began to behave inappropriately towards him. One day, the Daniel lured William into the woods with the promise of showing him frogs and other animals. However, as they went deeper into the woods, the Daniel began to abuse him. This abuse continued regularly, even after the summer camp ended. The boy was afraid to go to church and tried to avoid the Daniel as much as possible. The abuse began when William was 6 years old, and during this time, Daniel threatened him, saying that he would harm William and his family if he revealed what was happening. Fearing danger to his loved ones, William kept quiet, and the abuse continued for many months. After hearing the story, Jen felt she had to talk to Ellie. She apologized to William for revealing his secret, but felt the need to take action against the rapist and put an end to his actions. Jen first spoke to her sister Ellie about what had happened to William. Ellie was shocked and blamed herself for exposing her child to such a problem. From the beginning, her maternal instincts warned her that William should not attend the camp. However, she succumbed to the pressure, leading to the outcome she feared and experienced. William worried that the man might come back and act on his threat if he found out that William had told anyone about the incident. The boy became increasingly anxious and fearful. He often came home from school in tears, telling his mother that he had seen Daniel's car in the distance. The panic attacks became more frequent, and he began to feel paranoid. He tried his best to cope, but the situation was still not good. Ellie then reported the molestation involving their son to the police. Police checked Daniel's record in a national database, discovering a worrying history of crimes involving children. In 1984, he was charged with indecent exposure to 5 boys in the San Jose area. Although he was arrested, his church community sent letters of support to him before the trial. With no solid evidence other than the boys' testimony, the judge ultimately decided to give Daniel probation instead of a prison sentence, allowing him to escape the consequences of his actions. This leniency allowed him to continue his harmful actions. Daniel then decided to move away and start over. He moved closer to his mother, where no one knew about his past crimes. Daniel also started attending church and developed a healthy relationship with a woman who had a young son. He became more involved with the children, working with them, giving them advice, and eventually got a job at a church summer camp, where he was often around children. However, the woman began to notice Daniel's unusual behavior towards her child and started to pay closer attention. She eventually asked her son if Daniel had ever bothered him, but the boy appeared confused and insisted that nothing inappropriate had happened. The mother, doubting her son's honesty and fearing he was too scared to speak up, did not dismiss her concerns. She continued to monitor Daniel's behavior. A few months later, she caught Daniel molesting her son. She then contacted a friend who was the district attorney. A background check revealed that Daniel had served 5 months in 1983 for child abuse. Concerns about him grew when William's case occurred, prompting the boy's mother, Ellie, to contact the police. At that point, the police investigated Daniel more closely and gathered evidence from new victims of his molestation. After Ellie reported the incident, the police stepped up their efforts to prevent similar crimes by Daniel. Police began questioning all the families who had come into contact with Daniel, including children who had attended the camp. Many of them reported similar experiences, which helped police understand the tactics Daniel used. He repeatedly targeted boys, gaining their trust while threatening to kill them and their families if they spoke out, which proved effective. Police identified 5 new victims in the area, including William. In 1983, charges were filed, but they were unable to arrest Daniel because he had been out of town for an extended period of time. At the time, it was difficult to track his whereabouts due to the lack of cell phones, GPS, and other tracking technology. Police suspected that he had learned of the investigation and had gone into hiding. Both Daniel and his car were placed on the wanted list, and his photo was widely circulated in the press. However, despite these efforts, it took several years to find him. Meanwhile, William's depression and aggressive behavior continued. He frequently got into fights at school, did poorly in school, and became a bully. As a result, William was expelled from several schools and transferred several times. Ellie believes her son's behavior stems from past violence that has deeply affected him. She sought help for her son, taking him to numerous doctors and psychologists in hopes of improving his situation, but nothing seemed to work. In 1993, police finally caught up with Daniel at a store in Palo Alto, California, for shoplifting. After confessing to the theft, Daniel faced charges not only for shoplifting but also for child abuse. Even after Daniel was arrested and awaiting trial, William continued to feel afraid. He struggled to accept that he would have to face his abuser in court. William would have to testify against him, but the thought of it filled him with dread. William was so anxious that the mere mention of the trial made him feel sick. In desperation, Ellie approached the prosecutor to request special arrangements for her son's testimony. She hoped William could testify without Daniel present to spare him serious emotional distress. Unfortunately, the current rules required William to appear before a jury. To address this situation, the only solution was to install cameras so that William could provide testimony from another room. He would be recorded, and the video would be shown in court. Unfortunately, the small community lacked the funds to set this up. As a result, William had to appear in court like the other boys who had also been victimized by the Daniel. The trial was challenging due to the presence of many emotionally and physically traumatized children. The boys who had already testified had experienced significant distress, but they managed to get through it. On April 2, 1993, 11-year-old William was one of the last witnesses to take the stand. Ellie tried to prepare him for his meeting with Daniel the criminal as best she could. However, when the car carrying William and his relatives arrived at the courthouse, William did not want to leave. He began to have a panic attack and vomited violently. Ellie reassured him that he needed to testify because testifying was the only way to ensure that a dangerous person would be locked up and unable to harm anyone else. William understood the importance of his testimony, but his fear made it difficult for him to calm down. Ellie, William, and the aunts waited outside the courthouse to be called to testify. During this time, they tried to comfort William and help him calm down. Suddenly, a van arrived at the courthouse and Daniel was taken out. When William saw Daniel, he felt nauseous again. Ellie stared at Daniel as he walked through the courthouse yard. She later remembered that Daniel just smirked and walked past. She felt a burning hatred for this man. As they left the building, Daniel's ex-girlfriend and her son, who was also a victim, testified against him. The woman told Ellie that things were not going well. She noted that the children were nervous and confused in their testimony. Daniel took advantage of this by highlighting inconsistencies in their testimony. He continued to put the children in difficult situations, asking distressing questions that only made them more confused. They became increasingly upset, some of them crying. This makes Ellie worried about William. Ellie fears that the situation could affect the trial, potentially allowing a dangerous criminal to escape justice and return to his former criminal ways. At that moment, Ellie Nessler suddenly realizes that she must serve justice, and Daniel must be stopped forever. Court in this county lack modern security features like metal detectors. It is easy to carry guns inside. And many people in the community, including Jen, carry weapons for self-defense. While on the street, Ellie reached into her purse and quietly pulled out a gun. She hid the weapon as they entered the courtroom, where Ellie shot Daniel 6 times. 5 of the bullets hit him in the back of the head and neck, killing him instantly. People in the courtroom panicked and fled, and police rushed in with loaded guns. Jen stepped in front of her sister, causing Ellie to throw the gun to the ground and raise her hands in surrender. She was then arrested. The shocking story of a mother staging a lynching during a court hearing quickly made national headlines. Within a week, every major media outlet had covered the incident, sparking widespread debate about the lynching. Many saw Ellie as a hero, receiving overwhelming support from local residents, especially those affected by the event. 2 local banks even set up defense funds that the community could contribute to for Ellie, leading to a rush of donations from her supporters. Items such as T-shirts that read "Good shot, Ellie" became popular and which sold well. Similar stickers could be found on cars all over the country. Despite this, Ellie couldn't be celebrated as a national hero for her actions. She was arrested and had a bail set at $500,000. This amount was provided by a guarantor from Seaman, allowing her to return home before the hearings and await trial in her own community. However, not everyone agreed with her decision, and she faced criticism from some members of society who accused her of taking the law into her own hands. Still, the majority, including the local community, viewed her as a protector of her child. Police uncovered additional details about Ellie's situation. They found that she had been under the influence of illegal drugs when she fired her weapon in the courthouse. Ellie claimed she used these substances to give herself the courage needed to endure the stressful courtroom hearings. In October 1993, she received a diagnosis of breast cancer, with doctors estimating she only had 5 years to live. Initially found guilty of manslaughter, Ellie was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, her conviction was later overturned due to the jury's misconduct. She then reached a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting guilt to manslaughter, and ultimately served 3 years in prison before her release. William then moved in with his Aunt Jen. After 2 years, he was finally able to communicate with Ellie, who was still serving her sentence in prison. Ellie expressed her feelings. She deeply regretted having to take someone's life, which was never her intention. However, she felt that the justice system would not be able to protect her son and other children from a dangerous criminal. The only reason she pulled the trigger was the fear that Daniel would be released again. William's life was ruined at a key moment in his growing up. He was molested and then dragged through the courts. William became a hooligan, got involved with bad company, and lost his way. As a result, he had frequent encounters with the law, with courts and prison becoming a regular part of his life. He was first charged with a crime at the age of 14. He was incarcerated 18 times between 1999 and 2004 for various crimes. His criminal record was extensive, including charges of robbery, assault, illegal possession of a weapon, and drug-related offenses. In 2004, when he turned 23, William was living freely, had several tattoos, and resided in his family's house. He didn't have a permanent job, so, similar to his mother in her younger days, he was searching for temporary work for short periods. However, while Ellie had to do this out of necessity due to the economic crisis, for William, it was a result of his involvement in criminal activities. In 2004, he also took a part-time job with his friend David, helping to clean his house during construction and repairs. David had become disabled from working in the oil fields. In June, a dispute arose when tools went missing from the construction site, with both sides blaming each other. When the police arrived, William attacked David and beat him. Due to this incident, along with the previous charges, he was sentenced to 60 days in prison but was released after only 30 days. On July 26, 2004, just an hour after his release, he returned to his workplace. David attempted to escape but was unable to due to his disability. William then attacked David, kicking him in the head several times. As a result, David lost consciousness and died in hospital the following day. William fled the scene but was arrested a few days later and charged with first-degree murder. In June 2005, William Nessler was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Rebecca was the only one to escape the tragic fate and now lives a normal life with her family and children, often reflecting on the absence of her mother and brother during important moments. She deeply misses her brother William, who always looked out for her. Rebecca believes that William would not have ended up in prison if their mother had not shot Daniel. This tragic event caused a series of unfortunate events that made their lives worse. Despite this, she does not resent her mother. She understands that her mother was confused and made a hasty decision. In the end, Rebecca feels that her mother's actions prevented many boys from facing the same fate. Ellie's life ended in tragedy. In addition to battling breast cancer, she faced legal troubles. She became involved in distributing illegal drugs. In 2002, she bought materials for making drugs from a police informant. Initially, Ellie provided some drugs to the informant, but 5 days later, when she returned to collect the pills, she was arrested after the informant reported her. Ellie confessed to her crimes and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but she only served 4 years. She was released in 2006, but sadly, Ellie Nessler passed away from breast cancer on December 26, 2008, at the age of 56. When Ellie died, William asked to be released from prison to say goodbye to his mother. But his request was denied. 2 years later, in 2010, Rebecca and a reporter visited her brother in prison. They spoke for about 2.5 hours. During the conversation, William was very reflective, reviewing everything that had happened in his life. He did not try to justify his actions or blame anyone else. He noted that he felt he had been pushed down a path of self-destruction at the age of 6, a burden he would always carry. William emphasized how public opinion affected him, especially when the case of Daniel, a rapist who was murdered in court, was heavily covered by the media. The attention affected him. The whole community knew that William was also a victim, sexually abused at the age of 6. People discussed his past, which made him feel ashamed. He doesn't want this attention, but it's hard for him to escape it. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Nicole Dufresne. Today's story invites you to reflect on what might be lurking in the mind of an ordinary person. The fact is, people with malicious intent can be everywhere. The situation becomes even more dangerous when they are armed, putting everyone at risk. The Nicole Dufresne case is a heartbreaking example, where a promising young actress was mysteriously taken from her life. We not only question the motives of the perpetrator, but also the potential signs that may have been overlooked. Cases like this force us to be vigilant and wonder if danger could be lurking right next to us. Nicole Dufresne was born on January 5, 1977, in Minnesota, USA. From a young age, she was easily connected with her peers and adults alike. In school, she developed a passion for theater and was always creative, thriving in any performance opportunity. When it came time to choose a career after graduation, Nicole had without hesitation, she wanted to become an actress. She pursued a theater education in college, where her talents were highly regarded by her instructors. Nicole became a popular figure in her school, participating in all productions. She lived in Minnesota but realized that to build an acting career, she needed to make a change. She first moved to Seattle, where she worked hard to prove herself. A few months later, she relocated to New York, the true hub of opportunities for talented individuals. Nicole dreamed of performing on Broadway. Upon her arrival, she quickly found herself among many ambitious and attractive young women. The competition was fierce, and she feared she might not get a chance. However, she possessed qualities that set her apart: a sharp mind and genuine talent. In addition to growing as an actress, Nicole aspired to create her own productions. Many praised her modern and unique perspective on the stage. Her experience in her hometown further fueled her ambitions, enabling her to pursue her dreams. Eventually, she garnered attention for her talent and began her acting career in New York. By the age of 28, she had staged 2 of her plays and gained significant recognition. She seemed to be emerging as a theater star, with critics consistently praising her abilities. She was always poised, even in critical situations, managing to find the right words gracefully. Friends noted her exceptional ability to navigate challenging conversations and her self-confidence in social settings. Fate had set a challenging for her, which seemed impossible to overcome. After moving to the new city, both her career and personal relationships were progressing quickly. By the time the events unfolded, she was engaged. Nicole had started a relationship with Jeffrey Sparks, a close friend with whom she had collaborated on various projects. Jeffrey was also at the beginning of a promising acting career. They had known each other for a long time. Their friendship deepened into romance. They decided to get married and were preparing for the wedding. At the same time, Nicole was eager to finish several major projects. Despite her active involvement in the theater, she struggled to find stability. Living in New York was expensive, so she worked part-time as a bartender in Manhattan to support herself. Shortly before a tragic turn of events, she secured a job at a prestigious bar. Nicole was deeply engaged in the city's nightlife, typically performing in plays at night and working at the bar afterward, while resting during the day. She never considered that this lifestyle could lead to trouble. On January 27, 2005, Nicole with her fiancé Jeffrey and two friends were out enjoying the night in Manhattan. They stopped by a bar where they had a few drinks before planning to explore the city further. Nicole had been working at this bar for several months, and if they had chosen a different one, she might never have crossed paths with her attackers. Unfortunately, fate decreed otherwise. Around 3:00 a.m., after gathering their things, they left the bar. Less than 100 meters away, they encountered a group of strangers. Jeffrey initially tried to ignore the group and walk past them. But then one of the robbers attacked him in the head with a weapon, causing him to collapse and start bleeding. One of the robbers then aimed a gun at Nicole and requested her purse. Nicole, having some self-defense training, felt a surge of confidence to protect her friends and herself. She first tried to reason with the attackers verbally, but when that failed, she pushed the main aggressor who was holding the weapon. That night, her confidence in her ability to cope with any situation through diplomacy that night led to tragedy. However, not everyone agrees with this interpretation. Friends of Nicole insist that she did not provoke any aggression from the dangerous teenagers. There was a person who had a weapon with him, and the criminals were ready to carry out their threats. 19-year-old Rudy Fleming led a gang and was armed that night. Like his gang members, he aimed to steal valuables. He was particularly angered by the behavior of their chosen victims, especially Nicole. Rudy did not anticipate that an unarmed girl would try to fight back against the armed robbers. They considered themselves superior. The gang took what they wanted, but Rudy's intentions went beyond mere robbery. He attacked Nicole in the chest because he disapproved of her actions. After the attack, they fled the scene. Nicole's friends stayed with her, trying to comfort her in her final moments. She was bleeding heavily and struggling to breathe. Within minutes, she lost consciousness. An ambulance and police were quickly called. Unfortunately, by the time the medics arrived, she had already died. An autopsy revealed the wound had damaged vital organs, and she bled to death before the rescuers reached her. Detectives quickly interviewed potential witnesses, especially employees from the establishment where Nicole was enjoying time with friends. They reported that her group was behaving well and did not annoy anyone. The detectives obtained a detailed description of the attackers and soon apprehended the suspects. It turned out that the attackers were a group of 7 teenagers, aged 14 to 19, who admitted their involvement but provided conflicting accounts of the incident. None of them wanted to take responsibility for the murder, but their differing testimonies allowed detectives to piece together a rough outline of the crime. The group included 5 males and 2 females. The police later discovered that this group had been engaged in a series of robberies throughout the night. Just before the incident involving Nicole, they had assaulted a man near a nearby metro station, stolen his leather jacket and wallet. They had also threatened a girl in the same area. but she managed to escape unharmed. And they were still looking for additional victims, with Nicole and her group being their next target. One of the group members described their leader, Rudy, as aggressive throughout the evening. He expressed a desire to fight or hurt someone, but his friends thought he was exaggerating and did not take his words seriously. It seemed at first that he might abandon this idea and simply demand money from his victims. Rudy was holding a Taurus pointed downwards as a means to intimidate. Despite him having a weapon, other members of the group claimed they did not know about it. According to them, he did not show the weapon during the previous robberies and did not threaten anyone with violence until he encountered the 4 young people who were simply returning home from the bar. His accomplices informed the police that Rudy had intended to kill all these people at that moment and had mentioned this after the attack. Fortunately, he did not succeed, and the others survived. After Jeffrey was attacked, Rudy's cousin, Servizio Simmons, attempted to calm the situation by asking the victims to comply and hand over their money. Eventually, Rudy managed to take Nicole's bag and another girl's cell phone. He gave these items to the girls in the group, whose names were Ashley Evans, was only 14, still in high school, and Tatiana McDonald. Ashley had just turned 18. After that, Nicole attempted to assist Jeffrey. He had a cut above his left eye. He reassured her that he was okay and suggested they leave. A friend helped Jeffrey by supporting his arms as they walked back down the street. Mary Jane followed behind them. However, when Nicole tried to join her friends, Rudy tried to stop her, which made her extremely angry. The members of the group said that she broke free from her attackers and approached Rudy, looking him directly in the eyes. She shouted, "What's next? Are you going to attack us?" While glaring at her assailants. Rudy pushed Nicole in the chest with his left hand, causing her to stumble back. When the sound of the attack rang out, Jeffrey and his friend rushed to Nicole, who was lying on the pavement in a growing pool of blood. She died just a few minutes later. By the time the police arrived, everyone was kneeling by Nicole. The first 2 people detained were 2 girls from the group of Rudy. They claimed they didn't expect him to actually attack. They thought he was just using the weapon to intimidate. The girls realized things were spiraling out of control when he hit the victim's boyfriend. However, during the investigation, police discovered that the girls were not as innocent as they appeared. In reality, their motive for attacking Nicole and her friends was simply for their own amusement. They had noticed the group having fun and being loud as they walked down the street. Ashley was the first to spot Nicole and her friends, and became annoyed by their lively behavior. This led Ashley to instigate an attack against them. She directed Rudy's attention to a group of people who appeared wealthy, suggesting they could be targeted for profit. Rudy was already inclined to engage in a fight, so it wasn't difficult to provoke him. When Rudy was arrested, he initially denied his involvement in what happened. However, multiple witnesses, including Ashley, Tatiana, and Nicole's friends, identified him. The police apprehended Rudy and went to his house shortly after obtaining a warrant. They were primarily focused on finding the murder weapon, but it was never discovered during the search. In the police station, under pressure, the group of robbers admitted that Rudy and 2 girls disposed of the weapon together after the attack. Eventually, the weapon was found and underwent ballistic testing, which revealed that it was the weapon used to kill Nicole. Following the release of the report, some people criticized Nicole's response during the incident, arguing that she made a grave mistake. Psychologists also discussing the case on television claimed that she erred by trying to resist the armed attacker. However, Jeffrey insisted that there was no confrontation. He stated they attempted to leave the group of robbers by offering valuables. Jeffrey defended Nicole's actions, asserting that she showed no aggression. Instead, he believed her actions were an attempt to calm the man with the weapon and prevent him from attack. Meanwhile, Rudy was seeking a confrontation from the start and was eager to use the weapon that night. The other members of group supported this viewpoint. Besides, psychologists specializing in forensics noted that Rudy's behavior was typical of someone with severe emotional instability and low self-esteem. They believed he had committed a series of crimes that night in an attempt to look tough and boost his self-esteem. However, he encountered Nicole, who was strong and not easily intimidated. She showed that she was not afraid of him merely because he was a criminal. To her, he was just a misguided minor. Rudy expected her to show fear or respect because he was armed, but she did not respond as he anticipated. This unfortunate encounter resulted in the tragic death of Nicole. Despite these observations, the detective handling the case firmly supported the victim. He maintained that, regardless of her actions, Rudy is the killer. Rudy was deemed deserving of punishment. His cousin Servizio, along with Ashley and Servizio, were arrested because involved in the crime. The first trial was set for October 12, 2005. Rudy chose not to attend the courtroom in person and instead communicated via video from a separate prison room. Rudy faced charges of murder, robbery, attempted robbery, and possession of a weapon. For the murder charge alone, he faced a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was ultimately sentenced to the maximum possible sentence plus an additional 30 years in prison. Over the 2 weeks of investigation, detectives thoroughly reconstructed the brutal attack. The version of the investigation was confirmed from the very beginning. No one questioned Rudy's guilt. His actions were described as senseless cruelty that resulted in the death of a talented actress who had more potential than himself. In court, Rudy was portrayed as a cold-blooded killer, driven by hatred. The situation was so dire for the accused that his lawyer could do practically nothing to mitigate the sentence. In fact, the defense attorney acknowledged in court that the shooting of an innocent girl was completely unacceptable and did not even attempt to advocate for a reduced sentence for his client. Nicole's parents chose not to attend the hearing for the Rudy case. Her mother no longer wanted to give another second of her life to this cowardly man. Jeffrey reacted similarly. He was heartbroken over the loss of his fiancée. Rather than expressing his anger, he told the court that he would not harbor hatred, believing that the best punishment for Rudy would be to ignore him. He felt that the criminal did not deserve attention and belonged in prison. Additionally, Jeffrey mentioned the need for a movement against weapon violence, highlighting that decisions made by society allow individuals like Rudy to access firearms and harm others. Nicole's relatives compared their pain of loss to the life sentence given to the killer. They realized they could never bring Nicole back. This sentiment was shared by everyone who knew her. A professor who taught Nicole expressed that her death was a major loss for the theater community. Initially, Rudy seemed uninterested in seeking a lighter sentence. However, a few years into his prison term, he began to appeal his sentence. At that time, he had dismissed a lawyer who had not challenged the court's ruling. His new attorney claimed that his punishment was too harsh, citing his mental state and young age, as he had been diagnosed with psychosis. This raised questions about the legality of his conviction. The lawyer argued that Rudy was incompetent and filed an appeal on that basis. This led to several psychiatric evaluations. Ultimately, Rudy was deemed sane, and his case was not reopened. The investigators was concluded that Rudy was aware of his actions. His attack on a group of young people stemmed from his inherent cruelty and hatred. He posed a significant threat to society and deserved to remain in prison for life. Meanwhile, the lawyer continued to pursue appeals. A panel of judges was brought together to evaluate Rudy's mental state. In the end, various pieces of evidence were reviewed, including documents where Rudy faked and exaggerated his symptoms. His goal was to trick the psychiatrist into declaring him insane to avoid punishment. After assessing his mental condition, he was determined to be sane. His false claims were verified. In there, he attempted to mislead psychiatrists by making bizarre claims about seeing a giant marshmallow man and black and white cats sneaking around his cell. With Rudy's lack of intelligence to deceive seem foolish. Rudy never acknowledged his guilt or felt any remorse. When he realized he was not in a favorable position, he insisted that there wasn't enough evidence against him. However, these claims were dismissed, as the investigation conclusively demonstrated his guilt. After much effort on his part, he was unable to receive a reduced sentence. He was treated in a psychiatric hospital of a correctional institution, where he was prescribed medication to stabilize his emotional state. Rudy's accomplice faced charges separately. On February 27, 2007, Servizio Simmons appeared in court for his sentencing. He was found guilty as an accomplice in the attack and violent retaliation. Servizio was offered a plea deal and admitted guilt to first-degree robbery with aggravating factors, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence with no right to appeal. On April 26, 2007, Ashley Evans, who was believed to have instigated the attack and was also close friends with Rudy, was sentenced as well. Based on her lawyer's advice, she accepted a plea deal for first-degree robbery. The court determined that a 6-year sentence was appropriate for her to fully comprehend the seriousness of her actions. In court, Nicole's parents expressed their dissatisfaction with her sentence. Nicole's mother felt that the punishment was insufficient. She pointed out that her daughter could never be brought back, while Ashley would be released from prison young and healthy. In contrast, Nicole had her life cruelly taken from her. The perpetrator would have a future ahead of her and could potentially build a good life. In reality, the instigator did not even serve her full sentence. She was released on parole in 2012. At the time of the crime, she was 18 years old and was out of prison by the age of 23. Tatiana McDonald and another person were not charged in connection with the incident. This tragic event was widely discussed by the Washington National Crime Prevention Council. Despite various provocative theories, Nicole's behavior was heavily criticized. Experts noted that this was the worst possible outcome. The National Council issued a newsletter that used this case as an example. Psychologists concluded that the criminal's behavior stemmed from a need to demonstrate power. If you unfollow their instructions and attempt to resist, a criminal armed with a gun is likely to shoot. In this way, insecure attackers earn respect through inflicting pain and instilling fear, an experience Rudy did not endure that night. The swift arrest and conviction of Nicole's attackers may have brought justice, but it cannot undo the pain her loved ones endured. Nicole's story serves as a stark warning about the consequences of unchecked anger, urging us to confront the root causes of violence and how to deal with armed robbers. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jamie Hart and Carolyn Casey. Jamie Hart was born on November 14, 1977 in St. Louis City, Missouri, USA. After her younger sister Catherine was born, the family moved to Baytown, Texas, at a time when the oil industry was booming. Her parents wanted to find better job opportunities in this developing area. While in Baytown, Jamie focused on her studies and dreamed of leaving the town after graduation. She had enrolled at the University of Texas, a renowned school for biology and medicine, and needed to move closer to the campus in Bryan, near College Station. This area is safe and student-friendly. During her time there, Jamie developed a close relationship with her father, who supported her education financially. They spoke almost every day, and he visited her frequently. In her second year of college, Jamie met Chuck Cruz, a guy 3 years older than she was. He appeared more mature and had a stable job, which gave Jamie hope for a serious relationship. They started dating, and their family members noticed that they were a loving and happy couple. Meanwhile, Jamie's younger sister Catherine also starts college, This added financial strain on the family, making it difficult for them to afford their education. To ease the financial burden, Jamie decided to move into a dorm with other students to share the rent. The dorm was only a 6-minute walk from the university. In her new living situation, she had both female and male neighbors. However, living in a dormitory did not help her solve financial problems, and the situation continued to get worse. By spring 1999, she had to pause her studies. During this time, she worked full-time delivering pizzas. Despite this, she was determined to become a bioengineer and began saving money to continue her studies. On April 20, 1999, Jamie delivered pizzas around College Station and surrounding areas, finishing his job just after midnight. On May 1, her colleague Adam invited her to watch a movie. After spending time together, Jamie left around 4:30 a.m. Later that morning, her roommates noticed that her car was missing from the driveway, which worried them. One of her roommates called Chuck, who was getting ready for work. Chuck said he had no idea where Jamie was, as they hadn't seen or spoken to each other since April 29. He mentioned that they had had a fight a few days earlier and were taking a break from their relationship. As time passed and Jamie did not return, her roommates decided to contact the police. At 7:15 a.m. that same day, the sheriff's department received a call from a woman who reported finding torn clothing on the side of the road near Bryan. Jamie was severely beaten and appeared to have been thrown from a moving car, sustaining injuries from the fall. Shortly afterward, a patrol officer discovered more clothing scattered along the road about a kilometer away, some of which was torn and had what looked like blood on it. Authorities suspect she was abused. However, it was unclear whether she had been intentionally murdered or had died accidentally while trying to escape by jumping from the vehicle. A forensic examination was necessary to clarify these details. At around 5 p.m. that day, police discovered Jamie's car 10 kilometers from the location of her body. The car appeared to have been abandoned in a hurry. The headlights were still on, and the key remained in the ignition. The engine was idling, using up the remaining fuel. Outside the car, there was a substance that looked like blood, and inside, they found Jamie's driver's license. Her vehicle was only 3 blocks from the dormitory, but it was unclear why she had been unable to get back safely. The police arrived at Jamie's building and gathered initial information from her neighbors, who described her as a positive person with no known enemies. The police then visited her boyfriend, Chuck, at his work. He mentioned that he hadn't seen Jamie for a couple of days and hadn't been able to reach her that morning, assuming she was just sleeping. Meanwhile, forensic experts began examining the area where Jamie's car was found. The officers aimed to speak with anyone who might have witnessed the attack. They interviewed several hundred people in College Station. Some reported hearing screams early that morning, but no one actually saw anything. An advertisement was placed in the local newspaper offering a $1,000 reward for information that could help solve the case. No evidence of the suspect was found in the car. All the blood found inside and around the car belonged to Jamie. Additionally, forensic examinations of her body revealed signs of impact with a gravel embankment. Jamie sustained life-threatening injuries, including a skull fracture, a broken neck, and severe swelling. A hemorrhage in her brainstem ultimately led to her death. The medical examiner determined that she suffered for about half an hour before passing away. She died between 4:30 and 7 a.m., which fits the timeline of the incident. It took several more weeks to get the man's DNA profile from Jamie's body after the abuse, but the DNA sample was so small that it was difficult to find any matches. Police then spoke to Jamie's close friends and family to piece together what happened on her last day. They discovered that on Friday, May 30, she was delivering pizza, which meant she visited numerous locations throughout the city. This was important as it allowed officers to gather the addresses for all her deliveries. They needed to investigate everyone at those addresses and collect DNA samples. The detectives learned that after her shift, Jamie went to a friend's house, Adam. When investigators met Adam, he appeared very upset about the incident. However, suspicions grew when he refused to provide a DNA sample. Adam stated that Jamie visited him from 1 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. and left afterward to go home. Because he refused to cooperate with the investigation, he became the main suspect in the murder. Following their conversation, detectives decided to track him. One investigator followed Adam when he stopped at a bar. After a few blocks, Adam drank a beer, and the officer, who had been observing him, waited until he was out of sight to collect the mug he had used for a DNA sample. The police also attend Jamie's funeral, where they meet her boyfriend Chuck. Unfortunately, no one could verify his alibi. He lived with roommates, and they were asleep at the time, so his story could not be confirmed. When asked for a saliva and hair sample for DNA testing, he hesitated but eventually complied. He was then offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take. He failed every question of the test. As he grew increasingly anxious, he requested to retake the test, but he failed all the questions again, just as he had the first time. Chuck began to cry and confessed to having done several wrong things, but he didn't explain what those actions were. He acknowledged that they had argued shortly before the attack. Furthermore, one of the reports raised doubts about his relationship with Jamie, as she was considering another guy. So they decided to interrogate him again. During this second interview, he appeared very anxious and avoided making eye contact. He admitted that 2 days before Jamie died, they had quarreled over something trivial while at the grocery store. Chuck was questioned about his actions, and he eventually almost confessed. However, he denied any intention of harming Jamie and claimed that he was only discussing minor crimes. After this interrogation, he went to Dallas to stay with his parents and hired a criminal defense attorney. Chuck was frequently brought in for questioning, and the police confiscated his laptop and searched his car, apartment, while awaiting the results of the DNA test. Police believe the results will point to someone close to Jamie. Results later showed that the DNA did not match any individuals Jamie had interacted with that day, including the people she had delivered pizzas to. After this, everyone except for Chuck, who had failed polygraph tests, was ruled out as a suspect. Detectives were eager to accuse Chuck due to his unusual behavior, but he maintained his innocence and urged the detectives to conduct a thorough investigation to find the real killer. Unexpectedly, the Chicago police contacted Brian's department about a man who had been arrested and claimed to have information regarding the murder in Texas. However, it was ultimately determined that this was a separate case, unrelated to Jamie. Later, another witness came forward to the police. A student reported seeing a man abandon Jamie's car near the dormitory where it was later discovered. The witness observed the man closely and provided a detailed description, which did not match any of the current suspects. He described the man as a black male, around 20 years old, with an average build. Based on this information, a report was compiled and a summary was created and shared with local media to appeal for public assistance. Investigators are also looking into any links between this case and similar incidents that occurred frequently in the area in the 1990s. Meanwhile, the detective contacted Texas law enforcement agencies that specialize in serious crimes. All of them received a description of a young man who might be Jamie's killer. At the same time, Jamie's friends and acquaintances offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to a resolution of the case. However, after 6 months, the police still had no leads. By 2000, a year after the incident, the police still had no new information, and the detectives continued to suspect that Chuck might be involved. On May 28, 2000, Christine Lancaster, a 20-year-old student from the same university as Jamie, was visiting a friend whose apartment was just a 10-minute walk from where Jamie had been murdered. As she arrived at her friend's apartment, she was met with a shocking scene. Police were everywhere, and the area was cordoned off with tape. An ambulance was parked nearby, and forensic experts were searching for fingerprints and other evidence, indicating that it was a crime scene. At 4:50 a.m. that morning, a resident of the complex called 911 to report smoke coming from a window. At first, the security guard thought it was a normal call, maybe a student accidentally burning trash. But when they entered the apartment by breaking down the door, they were hit with the unmistakable smell of death, specifically burnt human flesh. In the bedroom, they found a young woman dead, dressed only in her upper body. It was evident that after the attack, the victim had been moved to this location, likely already deceased. The perpetrator also collected many flammable items such as paper, books, notebooks, and clothes to burn. The fire department confirmed that this location was the scene of the fire. They discovered that a window screen had been cut, allowing the intruder to enter through the window by cutting it and then reaching for the handle to get inside. Evidence indicated that the victim had fought back, as skin traces were found under her fingernails. The intruder also rummaged through her purse in the kitchen, searching for valuables, and left it turned inside out. The girl's driver's license was left at the scene, enabling authorities to identify her as 21 years old Carolyn Casey. She was born on July 28, 1978 in Lawton, Oklahoma. After graduating from high school, she moved to Texas to study and work as a teacher's assistant at a kindergarten. Carolyn was quite similar to Jamie in several ways. They lived close to each other and were the same age. Carolyn was also sociable and friendly, with no known enemies, which made the incident even more perplexing. When her parents were informed, they rushed to the scene of the tragedy. Meanwhile, detectives questioned neighbors. A neighbor named Isha Knight said he heard strange sounds coming from her apartment for about half an hour. However, he then went back to sleep. A subsequent autopsy found that Carolyn had died from strangulation, and there were signs that she may have been abused. The fire had destroyed any potential DNA evidence, but investigators still managed to find clues about the perpetrator. Carolyn had fought back, and skin particles were discovered under her fingernails. The forensic expert concluded that she was already dead when the fire started, as there was no smoke in her lungs. Christine was deeply affected by Jamie's death, and now Carolyn's death frightened her even more. Her fear was understandable, as she had been a victim of an attack 3 years earlier. On that day, Christine decided to unwind and attended a party at a friend's house. There, she met a friendly man, and they chatted throughout the evening. He was cheerful and made her feel comfortable. However, as night fell, a fight broke out between them. He then asked her to come up to his apartment. Once inside, the atmosphere changed drastically. He pushed Christine further into the room, locked the door, and turned on the stereo at full volume, demanding that she undress. Christine begged him not to harm her, even lying that she had HIV, but he ignored it. In a desperate effort to get help, she stomped her feet and screamed, but no one heard her. He assaulted Christine and even tried to strangle her. Fortunately, a friend downstairs heard her cries and called the police. Police arrived just in time and witnessed the man attacking Christine, while she was in critical condition, and he tried to silence her. He was arrested and taken to the police station, but shockingly, he was released the next day. Christine begins to wonder if there is a connection between the attack she experienced and the murders happening across the city. Police interviewed all the neighbors near where Carolyn died, which led them to a man named Inobi Matthews. He claimed that he only knew her as a neighbor and had no interest in her. He agreed to provide a DNA sample and even brought along the clothes he had worn on May 28, 2000, the day Carolyn was killed. Although Inobi appeared to be behaving normally, the police remained suspicious because Christine described him as a stranger. Moreover, Inobi had attended the party that Christine was at, even though he had not been invited. He had dark skin, which caught the officers' attention because one witness had described an attacker who resembled him. He said he went to the party with Carolyn, and she drove him to a nearby grocery store where he bought alcohol before going out with his girlfriend. this occurred around midnight, and he claimed to have never seen Carolyn again. However, when the police reviewed the CCTV footage from the grocery store, they were shocked to find that he was wearing completely different clothes than he had previously mentioned, suggesting he had provided false information about what he wore that night. The appearance recorded in the video matched a witness's description of the person who left Jamie's car behind. Detectives soon went to Inobe's home to search for evidence and found the clothes he had been wearing that day in a pile of dirty clothes. Bloodstains were present on these items. When questioned about this, he admitted that he and Carolyn had engaged in a consensual, intimate relationship. However, investigators concluded that there was insufficient evidence to make an arrest. Therefore, they decided to conduct further investigation to gather more evidence. Inobe Matthews, 20, has a troubled criminal record and has been involved in a number of violent incidents. He was absent from court in connection with an attack on Cristino. After failing to appear in court, police attempted to arrest him at his apartment and discovered that he had long since moved out. Eventually, Inobe was arrested. He gave a shocking explanation, claiming that Christine wanted to buy drugs but had no money. Therefore, she offered to have intimate relations as a way of payment. After their encounter, he gave her crushed aspirin. When she realized she had been tricked, she confronted him, and he tried to push her away, causing her to fall and suffer bruises. He insisted that he did not abuse her, claiming that her injuries were self-defense or an accident. Detectives reviewing Christine's case noticed similarities between it and the cases of Jamie, Carolyn. They decided to question Inobe. The police had little evidence against him, as DNA analysis was still ongoing. To apply pressure, an officer instructed a colleague to send a text message 10 minutes into the interrogation, stating in large letters that the DNA matched, without revealing any details. Initially, Inobe denied any wrongdoing, but upon receiving and reading the message, he became confused and confessed. Although the DNA test results were not yet available, his confession was sufficient for his arrest on first-degree murder charges. Inobe Matthews was born on April 14, 1976, into a dysfunctional family. Throughout his childhood and early adulthood, he faced many difficulties. He dropped out of school at 17, got married, and had his first child. Over the next few years, he had 3 more children, but showed little interest in them. During this time, he worked as a handyman, dealt drugs, and took on odd jobs to support himself. In the early 1990s, Inobe faced 4 charges of animal cruelty. Although convicted, he was released shortly afterwards. In 2008, he was convicted of forcing his girlfriend to have an intimate relationship, but he did not serve any prison time. He is famous for his ability to lie, and his lies often benefit himself. Following this, he was involved in other similar cases, receiving relatively light sentences and eventually being released under conditional terms. Inobe later discussed Carolyn's case and considered it an unintentional murder. He once again considered himself the victim, claiming that she attacked him first. When questioned about Jamie, he first denied any wrongdoing, but later admitted that he had broken into Jamie's car and assaulted her on May 1, 1999. He attempted to abduct her to escape. In a tragic turn of events, she jumped out of the moving car and suffered fatal injuries. Jamie's boyfriend, Chuck, eventually cleared the police of their suspicions and was satisfied with that. He repeatedly asserted his innocence and expressed concern that the killer might strike again. Chuck blamed the police for Carolyn's death, believing that it could have been prevented if they had pursued the actual criminal. In June 2001, a trial was held for the case of Carolyn. Several girls who were also victims of Inobe testified against him. They revealed that Inobe's preferred method of torture was to strangle his victims until they lost consciousness, then wait for them to wake up and strangle them again. He also took pleasure in torturing animals. DNA tests confirmed that his samples matched those found at the crime scenes. The jury found him guilty of Carolyn's murder and sentenced him to death. Additionally, for the murder of Jamie, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, in addition to the death penalty. He was imprisoned in 2001, awaiting execution. Statistics showed that the average time a criminal spends on death row before execution is over 10 years, often due to appeals for reduced sentences. However, Inobi did not pursue this option. He confessed to his crimes, which led to a faster execution. On January 6, 2004, he received a lethal injection. He chose not to make a final statement, but after the injection, he raised his hand and blew a kiss to his family, expressing his love for them. Many felt that his passing was not enough to make up for the horrific deaths of his victims, and it is believed that he may have harmed many more. Before the heartbreaking cases of Jamie and Carolyn, there was another victim named Misty Johnson. She was lucky to survive an attack by Inobi, who threatened to kill her if she did not comply with his demands. Although Misty reported the attack to the police, her story was questioned. Inobi claimed that their encounter was consensual and that there was no way to seek justice, leaving Misty feeling she had no choice but to withdraw from the situation. Stressed and hurt, she quit her job and moved to another city. Misty now regrets her decision and believes that if she had acted differently, she could have protected the other girls and saved their lives. Christine also struggled with guilt over Jamie and Carolyn's deaths for a long time. She eventually married, had children, and now lives in Spring, Texas. She works as a teacher and devotes herself to helping victims of violence and abuse. Welcome back to our channel. Today we'll be exploring a new case, the case of Amanda Mangus. Amanda Mangus was a kind and friendly girl from a young age. She was sociable, had many friends, and treated others with warmth. However, she was not too trusting and remained quite selective in choosing her immediate environment. Amanda grew up in a small town called Delta, Ohio, in the United States, with a population of just 3,000 people. She had a passion for the humanities and a deep love for children, which inspired her to pursue a career as an elementary school teacher. Amanda paid great attention to education because she wanted to ensure financial stability for herself in the future. Her plan was to graduate from college, find a full-time job, and establish her career before starting a family. Unfortunately, reality turned out to be very different from Amanda's idealized dreams. Her parents' relationship was filled with constant conflict and eventually ended in divorce. Amanda was 13 years old at the time, and she chose to live with her father, Mike Mangus. Not long after, her father remarried a woman named Deborah, and the three of them began living together happily as a new family. Among her friends, Amanda had a special connection with a boy named James Ramey, whom she had known since kindergarten. They grew up together, attended the same school, and became inseparable. During their summer jobs, Amanda described James as a funny and nice young man. Over time, their friendship blossomed into romantic feelings, and they eventually began dating. Their relationship deepened after they graduated from school. Determined to be independent, she found a part-time job in the kitchen of a local restaurant while continuing her studies. Introducing James to her family did not go as she had hoped. Her family, including her stepmother Deborah, disapproved of James from the start and expressed concerns about their relationship. However, she was so in love that she dismissed all the warnings as exaggerations, believing she knew better than others what to do. Normally, the adults viewed the situation more rationally. James began acting oddly, but despite this, Amanda, still very young, pursued a serious relationship with him. Eventually, Amanda decided to move out of her family home and live with James in his apartment. After they moved in together, James's behavior took a drastic turn for the worse. Over time, he became increasingly controlling, constantly jealous, and frequently accused Amanda of infidelity. His behavior escalated into emotional abuse, and Amanda began to experience the worst fears her relatives had warned her about. Being inexperienced, Amanda didn't initially understand what was happening in her relationship. She wanted to leave James fairly quickly because of his controlling and manipulative nature, but fear held her back. James acted as though he had the right to control every part of her life, from her friends to the clothes she wore. Even small actions, like Amanda leaving the house to go to the store, would prompt James to call her within minutes. Things took an even darker turn when Amanda discovered she was pregnant. At first, James reacted with indifference, but his discontent grew as Amanda paid less attention to him. Even though James wanted her not to give birth to this baby, Amanda refused it and focused on becoming a mother. Preparing for motherhood demanded much of her attention, which caused further strain on their relationship, as she was no longer completely focused on James. James kept insisting that he didn't want the child and pressured Amanda. However, Amanda steadfastly refused to comply with his request. On May 21, 2016, she gave birth to a baby boy. By this time, her relationship with almost all her friends had deteriorated. James was present at the hospital during the birth, but which only added to the tension. Amanda wanted to reconnect with her relatives, but James intentionally prevented her from doing so. Her father and stepmother strongly disliked James, and every meeting with him led to arguments and heightened conflict. James's behavior was typical of a manipulator. As a result, Amanda's father and stepmother were unable to see their grandson when he was born. They only met him for the first time when he was 3 months old. During this period, Amanda could only communicate with her parents through messages and share photos of the baby, Winston. Over time, James became increasingly controlling and manipulative. Even minor issues would upset him, and he would escalate them into major conflicts. His most frequent tactic was accusing Amanda of infidelity, often suggesting that Winston was not his son. Amanda was deeply hurt by this behavior. She resisted James in every way she could, but her struggles extended beyond dealing with him. She was also battling postpartum depression and the hormonal changes common among young mothers. The situation continued to deteriorate until James escalated from verbal abuse to physical threats. One day, he held a knife to Amanda's throat and threatened to kill her. Despite everything, Amanda still believed she could save the family for her son's sake. She convinced herself that James's aggression was solely due to the challenges their family faced after the birth of their child. Amanda chose not to confide in her relatives about the incident, instead sharing her feelings with a few friends. James's manipulative behavior not only terrified her, but also strained her relationships with her loved ones, leaving her afraid to seek their support. This is what usually happens in such situations. Amanda's friends recognized that what she was enduring was far from normal. With the arrival of Winston, James's behavior became increasingly dangerous, posing a threat not only to Amanda, but also to Winston. So, her friends urged her to leave him. Amanda was seriously considering ending the relationship, but the decision wasn't easy for her. She vividly remembered how loving, caring, and gentle James had been at the start. They had been friends for years, and Amanda held on to the hope that the current issues were only temporary. She believed that, with time, everyone would adjust. Because of this, she repeatedly forgave James for his insults and even the physical violence he had begun using. On one evening following argument, James and Amanda decided to go to a bar to have a drink, cool off, and discuss their problems. Deborah came over to watch the baby, expecting to stay only a couple of hours. But after 3 hours, neither Amanda nor James had returned home. That night, James drank heavily, while Amanda stayed sober. She ended up driving them home but had barely gone 2 blocks when James insisted on taking over the wheel. At first, Amanda resisted, but James grew angry. To avoid escalating the situation, she reluctantly gave in. It ought to be a reckless decision. Neither James nor Amanda was wearing a seatbelt. Just a few hundred meters down the road, James crashed into a parked car. The impact was severe. James, who was driving, hit the steering wheel but escaped with minor injuries. Amanda, however, struck the windshield with great force, shattering it and sustaining deep cuts. Despite being clearly responsible for the accident, James immediately began blaming Amanda, hurling insults and accusing her of causing the crash. Amanda, bleeding and worried about the severity of her injuries, ignored his accusations, focused on stopping the bleeding and assessing her condition. James, however, completely lost control, escalating from verbal abuse to physical violence and attacking his injured girlfriend. After the incident, Amanda realized that James lacked any genuine feelings for her. He was a cruel person she needed to avoid. Acting decisively, she immediately wrote a statement for the police and removed James from all her contacts. Following the attack and the accident, Amanda called her father, Mike, asking him to take her and her child back home. Once reunited with her family, Amanda obtained a restraining order against James, feeling confident that she and her son were now safe. Back at her parents' house, Amanda resumed living with them as she had before. Determined to move on, she focused on leaving behind the toxic relationship and erasing James from her life altogether. She found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant popular in the small town, where many residents already knew her. Amanda began reconnecting with old acquaintances, meeting new people, and building new friendships. As a naturally outgoing person, she quickly became well-liked by the restaurant's patrons. Life slowly began to improve, and the pain of her past gradually started to fade. Amanda earned enough money to support herself and her child, and soon she started searching for an apartment to rent. Despite getting along well with her parents, their home was too small for her to truly begin the next chapter of her life. While working at the restaurant, Amanda met a young man named Curtis. They had gone to school together in the past, but had barely spoken back then. As they started talking, Amanda discovered that Curtis was kind and caring. Their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Curtis embraced Winston, often making it clear that he considered the boy a part of his family. This warmed Amanda's heart and gave her hope for the future. On March 13, 2017, Amanda officially announced their relationship on social media, changing her status to in a relationship to emphasize their commitment. That same day, Curtis moved in with Amanda, and they began living together as a family, along with Amanda's baby, her father, and her stepmother. They also making plans to rent an apartment and build a life together. Early the next morning, on Tuesday, March 14, 2017, Curtis left for work before 5 a.m. At home, only Amanda and Deborah were at home. Amanda was still in bed, and Winston was quietly in his crib. About an hour later, Deborah was startled by a loud bang that jolted her awake. Half asleep, she couldn't immediately determine what had happened. It sounded like either a sound of weapons or something heavy falling. Alarmed, Deborah got out of bed to investigate. She called out for Amanda, but instead of a response, she heard a strange noise. Immediately after that, she heard footsteps rushing toward her room. Believing that an intruder had entered the house, Deborah reacted swiftly. To protect herself, she locked her bedroom door and leaned against it to block entry. However, the intruder attacked at the door lock, causing a bullet to graze Deborah's thumb and narrowly missing a more serious injury. With the lock destroyed, the intruder kicked the door open and entered the room. He was a masked man holding a weapon and appeared agitated, scanning the room cautiously as though anticipating resistance. The man glanced at Deborah and demanded to know about Curtis. Upon seeing Deborah in her pajamas, he appeared momentarily confused. Deborah told him that Curtis had already left for work roughly half an hour earlier. This enraged the intruder further. He admitted to attack Amanda and warned that he wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who tried to stop him. He then demanded Deborah's obedience. The man ordered Deborah to retrieve Amanda's mobile phone and demanded she hand over the baby. When Deborah tried to protest, he silently but menacingly pulled the trigger, showing it clear that she had no choice. Realizing resistance was futile, Deborah removed Winston from the crib but did not hand him over to the stranger, saying that she would accompany the baby. She also gave the man Amanda's mobile phone, as he had demanded. The stranger aimed a weapon at the back of Deborah's head and forced her to leave the house without letting her change her clothes. Despite the cold weather, Deborah was barefoot and still wearing her pajamas. He made her get into a car. Once inside, he removed his mask, and Deborah recognized him. It was James. He told her he needed an escort to escape the city with Winston, planning to use her as a hostage. James demanded that she guide him along the safest route to avoid police patrols. A few hundred meters from the house, James ordered her to call an ambulance. He claimed that Amanda, who was injured and could still be saved, was inside the house. He insisted that Deborah report this to the ambulance. She complied and called 911, informing the dispatcher about the injured girl and giving Amanda's address. However, before she could provide more details, the dispatcher asked for additional information, and James grabbed the phone. The police arrived at the scene within a minute of receiving the call. Patrol officers were the first to respond and immediately noticed that the front door was unlocked. Upon entering the house, one officer heard an alarm and followed the sound to Amanda's room. There, they found Amanda lying in bed and still alive. At first, the officers suspected a self-harm attempt and asked Amanda where the weapon was. Amanda didn't know where the weapon was, and it wasn't anywhere nearby. It soon became clear that someone else had attacked her. Amanda then asked about her child. One officer noticed a crib in the room, but it was empty. When asked who had taken her son, Amanda managed to say James Ramey before losing consciousness. Despite the doctor's efforts to save her, Amanda was already in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital but later succumbed to her injuries. During this time, Curtis and Mike was at work and completely unaware of the events unfolding at home. Deborah was being held hostage and was unable to alert anyone about the situation. The police had limited information, but discovered that Deborah and 10-month-old Winston were likely being held hostage by the attacker. Right away, an alarm was raised to notify local residents of the danger. An armed criminal with hostages in a car was on the run. Meanwhile, Deborah, holding Winston, was in the car with James as he sped away from the city. James was determined to reach the airport and demanded Deborah's assistance. Throughout the drive, he was visibly anxious. When they approached a railroad crossing, the barriers began to close as a train was approaching. In his panic, James didn't stop but instead accelerated. The crossing was elevated, and the car hit it so hard that something broke. He managed to get across the tracks, but the crash damaged both the car and the barriers. James and the hostages stopped a short distance from the railway, as the car could no longer move. Realizing he was trapped and needed help, James used his mobile phone to call a friend. Soon, a van arrived with a woman and 2 children inside. James, Deborah, and the baby got into the van, and they were driven to a house at an unknown location, apparently the home of the van's driver. Inside the house, James's friend was present. James made Deborah sit on the couch with the baby while he paced nervously around the room, holding a weapon. Clearly agitated, he began formulating a plan to take his friend's van and continue his escape in an effort to leave the country. At one point, Deborah asked to use the bathroom. James agreed but insisted that his friend accompany her. However, the friend stayed outside the bathroom. Seizing the opportunity, Deborah attempted to escape through the bathroom window but was unsuccessful. By this time, the woman who had taken them in the van and left the house with the children. She understood that the police could come here and was afraid that shooting would start. No one wanted to get hurt, especially with the children. James remained on edge as he hurriedly left with the hostages. He didn't trust anyone and suspected that his friend might contact the police. Nervous and tense, James drove while smoking a cigarette to calm himself and stay focused on the road. However, his lighter suddenly stopped working, prompting him to stop at the nearest gas station to buy a new one. Before leaving the van, James warned Deborah not to try anything foolish or she would be attacked. Inside the gas station store, James was captured on surveillance cameras for the first time since his escape. Security footage showed him looking visibly agitated, though at that moment, no one yet understood how dangerous him truly was. While walking through the store, an emergency alert suddenly sounded. It was a police warning, and a photo of James was displayed. Authorities informed local residents about the kidnapping of Deborah and the child. Additionally, they reported that Amanda had not survived the attack. She died in the hospital, although James had personally harmed Amanda, but he seemed deeply shaken by the news of her death. He returned to the car with a lighter, refusing to leave. He stood there, lost in thought, contemplating his next move. James began speaking aloud. He stated he had only 5 bullets left, 1 intended for Winston, 1 for Deborah, and the other 3 to confront the police. He believed those bullets would be enough to overpower the police and then take their weapons. There was also a backup plan. If things didn't go as intended, James had kept 1 last bullet for himself. He resolved to either escape or take his end life if the escape failed. After making this horrifying statement, they continued driving. Deborah's anxiety deepened, sensing the growing danger. By the time the police arrived at the gas station, it was too late. James and the hostages had already left. The FBI soon took over the case. They were able to estimate James's direction, but remained several hours behind him. To stop James, the operation enlisted police officers from surrounding cities and even neighboring states. At this time, the case had now escalated to the federal level. In the following hours, no progress has been recorded. Deborah and Winston were still being held hostage by James, while the police carefully tracked their movements. A camera at another gas station, a few hundred kilometers from the previous one, captured the van driven by James's friend. James stopped there as well but forced Deborah to remain in the van, threatening to kill her if she attempted to seek help. Desperate, Deborah considered approaching a passerby to explain her situation, but she didn't even know her exact location. She realized they were far from home, where people might not be aware of the kidnapping and murder. Ultimately, she chose not to take the risk and placed her hopes in the police, trusting that they were doing everything possible to rescue her and Winston. James bought a can of beer, some chewing gum, and used the restroom. After he returned, Deborah asked to use the restroom as well. Since she looked suspicious without proper clothing and footwear, he gave her a jacket and sneakers. This was fortunate because it was cold outside. Once Deborah returned, James drove away from the scene with the hostages. The police still a pursuit and eventually located the car. A gas station worker, upon learning about the situation, contacted the authorities. On the road, James drove recklessly and regardless. At one point, Deborah tried to move closer to Winston in the back seat to shield him with her body if the attack began, but James prevented her. Winston remained in the back lie throughout the incident. James abruptly stopped the car and placed his child on his lap. Armed police officers approached and surrounded the in Fulton County, Indiana. Although James had previously made threats and behaved erratically, but finally he did not harm the hostages, police or himself. Instead, he peacefully handed Winston to the police and was taken into custody. Deborah and Winston's dangerous situation finally ends. Overwhelmed with relief, she couldn't even shed tears and fainted on the spot due to the intense stress. Amanda's funeral was held afterwards. She was cherished by many, and her funeral was attended by over 100 people who came to pay their respects. And she was cremated. The investigation revealed that James's erratic behavior was driven by simple jealousy. After seeing a social media post from Amanda stating that she was in a new relationship, he lost control of his emotions and couldn't calm down. James decided to deal with her after previously warning her. When she had dismissed his warnings, determined, he armed himself and went to Amanda's home, intending to catch her with another man. However, Curtis was no longer there, so James attacked only Amanda. If her new boyfriend had also been present, he likely would have faced the same fate. In the end, James confessed to all his crimes and was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 27 years. Deborah was astonished that Amanda managed to survive until the police arrived and helped investigators identify the attacker. Deborah still considers herself indebted to Amanda and has taken on the responsibility of raising Amanda's son. Winston is being cared for by Amanda's father and stepmother. Amanda's heartbreaking death still leaves everyone in deep mourning. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lauren Giddings. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984 in Tacoma Park, Maryland. She grew up with her two older sisters, Sarah and Caitlin. Her parents, Karen and William, maintained a warm and friendly atmosphere in the family. From a young age, she was always studious and religious. She was a member of St. Mary's Catholic Church and attended church from kindergarten through 8th grade. In 2002, at the age of 18, Lauren graduated from high school. That same year, she went to Georgia to attend an academy, where she studied until 2006. After leaving the academy, she returned home and worked at the National Public Policy Center in Washington. In 2008, she returned to Georgia to study law at Mercer University. Lauren was a blue-eyed, blonde with an athletic build who loved nature and animals, especially her pet dog, a Pekingese. Her relatives described her as a kind person who respected others' opinions. Sarah later noted that during college, Lauren transformed from a shy person into an active young woman with many friends. She was the pride of her family, and they had high hopes for her. However, her move to Georgia set off a series of unfortunate incidents that led to a tragic end. Mercer University is located in Macon, a city in central Georgia, right across from Lauren's dorm. Most of the people living in the dormitories are university students, and they usually know each other. Among them was Stephen Mark McDaniel, who lived near Lauren's room and was also in law school. Both are members of the Federalist Society, an organization of some 60,000 lawyers, both those studying and those already practicing. Lauren served as president of the society, while Stephen served as vice president. This was their only relationship. Stephen was known to be quiet. He was not very social and rarely drank. Lauren, on the other hand, was very attractive, had many interests, and maintained a busy schedule. Before they met at university, Stephen and Lauren had very different lives. Stephen was born on September 9, 1985 in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents, Glenda and William, worked in a factory. He was a bright child who valued cleanliness and organization. Until he was 13, he sang in the church choir in his hometown. Stephen aspired to write a novel, pursue a career in criminal law, and ultimately become a federal judge. After completing high school, he enrolled in law school in 2008, where he met Lauren. He had worked up the courage to ask her out a few times, but Lauren had kindly declined, explaining that she was dating David, a lawyer from Atlanta who was 20 years her senior. They started dating in 2007, before she went to college, when she interned at the law firm where he worked. After she moved to Georgia, David followed her, and their relationship continued. To discourage Stephen from pursuing her, Lauren mentioned that she and David planned to leave the city after graduation and live together. On May 11, 2011, Lauren fulfilled one of her biggest dreams, graduating with a Juris Doctorate. Her next goal was to obtain a license to practice as a lawyer, which required passing a challenging exam. As she prepared for the exam, everything went smoothly, and she felt confident about her future. However, she knew she would soon need to leave the city. Stephen silently accepted this fact. On the surface, he appeared calm, but in his mind, he had other plans. In June, Caitlin got married in Maryland, and Lauren attended the wedding. Soon after, she returned to her dormitory in Georgia to focus on studying for her upcoming exams. On the evening of June 25, David received an email from Lauren. In the email, she mentioned feeling uneasy and sensing that something strange was happening in her house. That reminded her of a similar experience she had over a year ago. At the time, she told her sister Caitlin that she suspected someone had broken into her home and gone through her belongings. At this point, Lauren's family and friends knew she was busy studying for exams, so they weren't worried when she stopped communicating. The last time anyone saw her was on Saturday, June 25, 2011, at a store. Caitlin sent her a few messages, but didn't think much about the lack of response. Caitlin believed she was too busy to respond. It wasn't until Wednesday evening, June 29, that David and her relatives began to worry because she had been silent for so long. David called Caitlin to ask if she had heard from Lauren, which worried her, as she had also tried to contact Lauren to no avail. She then contacted some of Lauren's friends, but no one had any information. Ashley, a friend of Lauren's, went to knock on her room, but no one answered, and it was quiet inside. Curious, she looked for Lauren's car and found it missing. The 2004 Mitsubishi was usually parked where Lauren always left it. Ashley remembered that Lauren had shown her where the spare key was in case of an emergency, so she used it to get into the apartment. Everything was in order. Lauren's personal belongings, phone, wallet, passport, and computer were in their usual places. Only Lauren was missing. While everyone was frantically searching for Lauren and trying to find clues about her whereabouts, Stephen entered the apartment. He stayed for a while to observe and chat with a few people before leaving. Ashley then discovered that Lauren's phone was dead, so she plugged it in to charge. Once the phone turned on, she checked it and saw that the last calls were made on June 25, 4 days earlier. Realizing it was time to involve the authorities, she called 911. A few minutes later, police officers from Mercer University arrived and relayed the information to the Macon police. After midnight, police officers, along with Lauren's friends and neighbors, began searching for her. At 3 a.m., after a thorough check of the dormitory area, the police left without any news about Lauren. Caitlin became worried and decided to inform her parents. Her father quickly got in the car and drove to Macon to file a missing person report. After her father filed the report, the detectives began their investigation. They drove to the dormitory where Lauren lived but couldn't find a parking space, so they parked in front of a dumpster. When investigators entered Lauren's room, they used luminol, a chemical that can detect blood, to conduct a test. They sprayed luminol on the walls, floors, and some objects in Lauren's living room, kitchen, and bedroom. However, things took a turn for the worse when they entered the bathroom and found the floor reacting violently to the luminol. At this point, everyone realized this was a crime scene and that something terrible had happened to Lauren. Meanwhile, friends and family continued to search for her. When interviewing Stephen, he described Lauren as a good and honest person, but admitted that he did not know where she was. According to Stephen, she had gone jogging and was attacked by a criminal. At the time he was sharing this, a garbage truck arrived. However, they were unable to collect the trash because a police car had parked in the wrong place and blocked the entrance to the trash bin. this was a pivotal moment that helped investigators quickly uncover the truth about what had happened to Lauren. Several detectives, having found nothing in Lauren's apartment and returning to their car, suddenly sensed a foul odor. It was the smell of death. They traced the odor to the garbage containers and began to investigate them. Inside one black plastic bag, they discovered a decomposing human torso. After examining it, the detectives concluded that it was likely the remains of a female, probably belonging to Lauren. While Stephen was talking to a reporter, a press officer interrupted to announce that the police had just discovered a body in a trash can behind the house. Initially confused and silent for a few seconds, Stephen then asked again about the body. He stammered that he needed to sit down, turned away from the camera, walked a short distance, and sat down near some bushes. Throughout this, the media operator captured his reactions. He appeared pale and was visibly shaking. Then, on the night of June 30, Stephen voluntarily went to the police station to provide a statement. The questioning lasted for 12 long hours. When asked about Lauren, he said he always noticed when she left or entered the dormitory. Even though he did not speak to her directly, he could hear or see her passing by his window. Furthermore, he claimed that he was always aware of all the activities in the dormitory. After being questioned, Stephen allowed the police to search his home, including his bedroom, where they discovered a rope, several weapons, blood-stained blue gloves, a master key to open the apartment door, and a pair of women's underwear. The investigators also seized Stephen's car, where they found more bloodstains. They found his computer, which contained conversations on a blog under the alias Sun. In this blog, he wrote about women and violence. In another post, Stephen discussed a situation that seemed to involve Lauren. He mentioned that he had been consumed by thoughts of one person for a long time, someone he wanted to protect from harm. If given the chance, he would have fought against anything that could hurt her without hesitation, but his mental struggles prevented him from doing so. He couldn't even confess his feelings to her, leaving him to watch her from afar. On Stephen's computer, many compromising photos were discovered, including pictures of Lauren. Additionally, a hacksaw with bloodstains was found in the tool cabinet, suggesting that a disturbing situation had occurred. Detectives concluded that Stephen had committed a heinous crime against Lauren. The evidence collected was sufficient to officially arrest Stephen McDaniel on July 2, 2011. On July 6, DNA tests showed that body parts found in a trash can belonged to Lauren. In August 2011, Stephen was charged with murder. Police thoroughly searched the dormitory and surrounding areas for other body parts, but found nothing more. Despite overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence during the early stages of his detention. After examining the contents of Stephen's computer, investigators discovered that he had been monitoring Lauren's accounts and social media. In addition to the murder charge, on August 23, 2011, Stephen was charged with 7 more counts and was ordered to post bail of $850,000, a huge amount of money for him and his family. In February 2013, the prosecutor's office announced that they would not seek the death penalty, at the request of Lauren's family. In 2014, just a week before his trial, Stephen surprised everyone by pleading guilty. The decision to plead guilty was part of a deal with prosecutors in which he agreed to accept responsibility for Lauren's death in exchange for dropping several other charges against him. Nearly 3 years after her murder, he recounted what really happened. Stephen said that on the morning of June 26, 2011, he entered Lauren's apartment while she was sleeping. He sat on her bed to watch her. When she woke up and saw him, she tried to stay calm and pleaded with him not to hurt her. Instead of leaving, he grabbed Lauren by the neck and squeezed tightly. She fought back desperately to escape. They both fell to the floor, and her legs got trapped under the bed, which worked to Stephen's advantage since she couldn't kick him. However, she managed to hit him with her hands and pulled off his mask. Fear engulfed her when she realized the attacker was her neighbor, Stephen, a fellow law student and vice president of the same organization she led. Once a shy and reserved guy who had asked her out, he had transformed into a terrifying figure. He violently grabbed her by the neck in an attempt to strangle her. Despite Lauren's desperate pleas for him to stop, he ignored her cries and continued to tighten his grip for several minutes. When she fell still, he released her at 4:30. Stephen then dragged Lauren's body into the bathroom, placed her in the bathtub, and returned to his apartment. There, he spent the day on his computer. He eventually returned to Lauren's apartment with a hacksaw. Without hesitation, he began wrapping the body parts in black bags and throwing them into various trash cans around the dormitory. He kept her torso for 2 more days before dumping it in a container outside the building, where police later discovered it. Stephen reported that within 48 hours of the crime, he had disposed of the mask and shirt stained with Lauren's blood. When questioned about the motive for the murder, he confessed to being obsessed with Lauren since they met. He revealed that he had been spying on her for months, using a setup to observe her without her noticing. Stephen also admitted that he had carefully researched methods to avoid detection. Thanks to this, he was able to use the master key he had stolen from the dormitory manager to enter Lauren's room. She was about to become a lawyer, something she had always dreamed of throughout her life. However, she had no idea that Stephen, who had been secretly watching her, would completely transform her life. After a trial in 2014, Stephen Mark McDaniel was convicted of a violent crime and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. After receiving the verdict, he began to do everything he could to regain his freedom. Despite admitting guilt, he maintained that he did not abuse Lauren. Stephen also shared with investigators his irrational belief that Lauren was still alive. He claimed to have a split personality, which he said made it difficult for him to explain his actions, yet he continued to follow his daily routine. He expressed feelings of remorse and stated that he missed Lauren greatly, but he understood that he could not expect forgiveness from her family. In 2018, Stephen's father set up an online fundraising page to hire a lawyer for his son's defense. However, the campaign was met with strong opposition from Lauren's family and friends, leading to its immediate cancellation. As a result, Stephen was forced to represent himself at the hearing. He argued that his rights were violated in the original sentence. Additionally, he criticized his previous lawyers for not defending him adequately, but his request for a review was denied. He subsequently appealed to the Supreme Court of Georgia and then to the Supreme Court of the United States, but both appeals were rejected. In January 2022, as well as in May and December of that year, he attempted to have his trial reviewed, but was unsuccessful. In January 2023, nearly 9 years after pleading guilty, he filed another appeal seeking to reduce his parole eligibility period. This time, he submitted a petition to the federal district court. But, as before, his appeal was denied. Stephen's mother struggled to accept the painful reality of her son's involvement in the murder. His grandfather expressed deep sadness, reflecting on the 25 years during which he had been proud of his grandson, but now found it hard to recognize him. During a visit to the facility where Stephen was held, the grandfather felt as if he were seeing a different person. Overwhelmed with despair, he left and chose not to visit Stephen again. Lauren's relatives found some comfort in the belief that Stephen would eventually realize the significance of his actions during his time in prison, which might lead to his repentance. Caitlin, her sister, honored Lauren by naming one of her daughters after her. The family continues to celebrate Lauren's birthday and maintains a tradition of wearing pink clothes on Wednesdays. Just as Lauren had during her life, Lauren's tragic fate is a reminder of the importance of staying vigilant when sensing danger. In Lauren's case, the threat was not only visible, but also close at hand, as she fell victim to someone who appeared harmless. This incident not only destroyed her dreams, but also broke the hearts of her loved ones.